Welcome to ancient Egypt, my tired little sleep circle. You're about to experience a day in the life of a pharaoh here tonight during the height of the New Kingdom, around 1300 years before the Common Era. You'll walk through the halls of power, perform sacred rituals, and navigate the delicate balance between being a living god and a mortal ruler. So before we begin, be sure to turn on a fan for some noise and like the video as it helps us out. Now let the Nile carry you back to a time when your word could move mountains and your legacy would outlast the stars. You open your eyes before dawn, and the first thing you notice is how quiet everything is. Not silent. Egypt is never truly silent, but hushed in that particular way that happens when an entire palace is holding its breath, waiting for you to wake up. Somewhere beyond your bedchamber, you can hear the distant sound of water being poured, the soft padding of bare feet on limestone floors, and the gentle rustle of linen as servants prepare for your day. But none of them will enter until you signal that you're ready. Being a god has its perks, and privacy before sunrise is one of them. The bed beneath you is surprisingly comfortable for something that looks like it was designed by someone who'd never actually slept before. It's a wooden frame with a footboard carved to look like protective spirits. Part lion, part something else entirely that you're not entirely sure about, but the artisan seemed confident, so you went with it. The mattress is woven reed covered with linen sheets that somehow stay cool even in the Egyptian heat. Your headrest, a curved piece of wood that cradles your neck, has taken some getting used to over the years. When you were younger, you thought it was a torture device disguised as furniture. Now you can't sleep without it. The room smells like myrrh and frankincense from the censers that burn through the night, mixed with the peculiar scent of old stone that permeates every building in Egypt. It's not unpleasant. Actually, it's become so familiar that you find it comforting, like the smell of rain to someone who grew up in a wetter climate. Through the high windows, you can see the sky turning from black to deep blue. That particular shade that only exists for about 15 minutes each morning before the sun decides to make its dramatic entrance. You sit up slowly, because even pharaohs need a moment to let their backs adjust after lying down all night. The golden lapis lazuli pectoral you wore to bed, you're never completely unadorned even in sleep, catches the pre-dawn light and throws tiny blue stars across the wall. It's one of your favourites actually, less ostentatious than some of the ceremonial pieces, but beautiful in a way that doesn't scream, "Look at me, I'm incredibly important and wealthy." It just whispers it politely. There's a gentle cough from beyond the door. Not an impatient cough, because nobody in their right mind would cough impatiently at a pharaoh. But a "we're ready when you are but also the sun waits for no one" kind of cough. You call out that you're awake, and the door opens to admit a small procession of people whose entire job is to make sure you don't have to dress yourself. Leading them is Amenhotep, your chief steward, who has perfected the art of looking simultaneously alert and serene at an hour when most people look like they've been hit with a brick. The purification ritual happens first, before you can eat or drink or do anything else, because you can't very well commune with the gods while smelling like you've been asleep for 8 hours. 2 priests enter carrying alabaster jars of water drawn from the Nile at a sacred spot upstream. The water is cool and clean, and they pour it over your hands and feet while reciting prayers that you've heard so many times you could recite them backwards. You probably shouldn't mention that you once tried doing exactly that during a particularly boring ceremony when you were 13. Your high priest wasn't amused. The washing is methodical and strangely peaceful. One priest focuses on your right side, the other on your left, moving in perfect synchronization like they've been practicing this routine for years, which of course they have. Water runs over your skin and collects in a bronze basin beneath your feet, carrying away the night and, symbolically at least, any impurities that might have accumulated while you slept. You watch ripples form in the basin and think about how the Nile itself must be going through its own morning routines downstream, preparing for another day of keeping millions of people alive. Next comes the anointing with oils. These aren't your everyday oils. Nobody's rubbing you down with whatever they use to keep door hinges from squeaking. These are sacred oils, expensive oils, oils that had to be imported from places so far away that the merchants who brought them spent months travelling through deserts and across seas. The chief oil is myrrh mixed with cinnamon and something floral that you can never quite identify, but smells like what you imagine the god's garden would smell like if gods needed gardens. The priest applies the oil to your forehead first, drawing symbols you can't see but can feel in the patterns his fingers make. Then your chest, your arms, and your feet. The oil soaks in slowly, leaving your skin gleaming in the lamplight. You smell like a temple now, which is appropriate, considering you're about to become the primary link between Egypt and every god who's paying attention this morning. The dressing process is its own kind of ritual. First, the linen kilt. Not just any linen, but royal linen, woven so finely you can barely feel it against your skin. It's pleated within an inch of its life, each fold sharp enough to cut papyrus, and it's held in place with a belt that weighs approximately as much as a small cat. The belt is gold, because of course it is, inlaid with semi-precious stones arranged in patterns that tell stories about your divine right to rule, and your ancestors' divine right to rule, and basically everyone in your family's divine right to do whatever they want. Then the collar. This is where things get serious weight-wise. The broad collar is a masterpiece of goldsmithing, rows upon rows of gold, carnelian, turquoise and lapis lazuli beads strung together to create something that's part jewellery, part armour, and part statement piece that says, yes, I could buy your entire village with what I'm wearing around my neck. It settles onto your shoulders with a familiar heaviness, and you automatically straighten your posture to compensate. You've been wearing these collars since you were crowned, and you've developed neck muscles that could probably support a small building. The crown comes last. Not the elaborate double crown you'll wear for major ceremonies. That thing requires its own support staff and gives you a headache after about 20 minutes. But the simple Neems headdress, the striped linen cloth that frames your face and makes you instantly recognisable as Pharaoh, is surprisingly practical actually. Keeps the sun off your head, keeps your hair out of your face, and looks sufficiently impressive that people remember they're in the presence of royalty. Finally, they hand you the crook and flail. These are your symbols of kingship, the tools that mark you as both shepherd and warrior of Egypt. The crook is hooked at the top, symbolising your role in guiding your people. The flail is a kind of whip thing that honestly serves no practical purpose, but looks great in reliefs and reminds everyone that you could theoretically smite them if necessary. You hold them crossed against your chest in the traditional pose and catch sight of yourself in a polished bronze mirror. You look like a pharaoh. You look like power personified. You look like someone who definitely knows what they're doing and has everything under control. It's a good look, even if you know that underneath all the gold and oil and carefully arranged linen, you're just a person who's going to need to visit the privy at some point today and would really like some breakfast. The sun god Ra is making his appearance on the eastern horizon, which means it's time for you to make yours at the temple. This is non-negotiable. You could be dying, and actually one of your predecessors did perform the morning ritual while dying, which everyone agreed was impressively dedicated, but also maybe taking things a bit far, and you'd still need to show up to help the sun rise. Because according to theology, the sun doesn't rise on its own. It rises because you, as the living embodiment of Horus, perform the correct rituals to make it happen. No pressure. The walk to the temple takes you through corridors that are starting to come alive with activity. Servants press themselves against the walls as you pass, heads bowed, because looking directly at you is considered bold at best and sacrilegious at worst. You've tried to tell people they can look at you like a normal person, but apparently that's not how divine kingship works. So you've learned to acknowledge them without requiring eye contact. A small nod here, a gesture there, enough to show you see them without forcing them into an awkward theological situation. The temple is cool and dark, lit only by oil lamps that create pools of golden light in the darkness. The air is thick with incense, so thick you can practically taste it, and you've developed the ability to breathe through your mouth without being obvious about it. The walls are covered in hieroglyphs and images that tell the story of creation, the gods, your divine ancestry, and several of your own accomplishments that may have been slightly exaggerated by the artists. That battle you won. In real life it was messy and terrifying, and you nearly got knocked off your chariot. On the temple wall you're single-handedly defeating thousands of enemies while remaining perfectly coiffed. The high priest is waiting for you at the sanctuary entrance. along with a collection of other priests who form a kind of religious entourage. They're all shaved completely bald, not just their heads, but eyebrows, everything, because body hair is considered impure in sacred spaces. You've always found this a bit extreme, but you're not the one who made the rules. Well, technically you are the one who could change the rules, being Pharaoh and all, but some traditions are so old and so ingrained that even you don't mess with them. The inner sanctuary is where the god actually lives, not metaphorically lives. The statue in their house is the actual essence of the god, making it the most sacred and most dangerous spot in all of Egypt. Only you and the high priest can enter, and even then, only during specific rituals. The door is sealed with the previous day's seal, which you break with the ceremonial knife. The wax cracks with a satisfying snap, and the heavy doors swing open to reveal the god's dwelling. The statue is magnificent, covered in gold leaf and precious stones, wearing its own set of ceremonial garments that get changed daily. It stands in the dim lamplight, looking appropriately divine and slightly intimidating. The deity's eyes seem to follow you as you approach, which is either a trick of the light or proof that the god is indeed present. You prefer not to think about it too deeply. The morning ritual is always the same. You approach the statue, reciting prayers in the ancient tongue that you learned phonetically as a child. Even though you're fluent in them now, there's something about the sound of the words, rounded and formal and heavy with millennia of repetition, that makes them feel powerful. You're not just speaking. You're activating something, connecting to a power that existed before your great-great-great-grandparents were born. You purify the statue with water and natron, carefully washing the god's face and hands. Then you dress it in fresh linen, removing yesterday's garments and replacing them with new ones that have been specially prepared and consecrated. The god gets jewellery too, necklaces and bracelets that you fasten with steady hands, taking care not to let them tangle. You've gotten quite good at this over the years. The first time you did it, you were so nervous you nearly dropped a priceless amulet. The high priest's face went through several shades of pale before you caught it. Food offerings come next. A small feast is laid out before the statue. Bread, beer, roasted duck, fresh fruit and vegetables prepared exactly the way the god prefers. The irony isn't lost on you that the god probably doesn't actually eat the food. But what happens is that the god's essence consumes the spiritual part of the meal, leaving the physical part to be distributed among the priests later. It's an efficient system, really. The gods get fed, the priests get fed, and everyone's happy. You light incense and make the final offerings, reciting the prayers that release the god's power to flow through Egypt for another day. It's during these moments that you sometimes feel something shift in the air, something you can't quite explain but that makes the hair on your arm stand up. Maybe it's just the incense smoke playing tricks on your mind. Maybe it's the weight of belief from millions of Egyptians flowing through you. Maybe the gods really are listening. When you emerge from the sanctuary, the sun has fully risen. This is important. If you'd failed in your duties, theoretically the sun wouldn't have risen. Egypt would have fallen into chaos, and it would have been entirely your fault. But the sun is shining. The Nile is flowing, and the world continues to exist, which means you've successfully fulfilled your cosmic responsibilities for another morning. You allow yourself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The rest of the morning involves more temples and more gods. Egypt has a lot of gods, an almost embarrassing number of gods, really. And while you can't personally visit all of them every day, you need to make regular appearances at the major temples. There's the Temple of Amun, the king of gods, whose priests wield almost as much power as you do, and need to be kept happy. There's the Temple of Ptah, patron of craftsmen, whose favour you need if you want your building projects to succeed. There's the Temple of Hathor, goddess of love and joy, whose festivals are significantly more fun than the other gods' festivals. Each temple visit follows a similar pattern. Approach with appropriate reverence, perform the rituals, make the offerings, and listen to the priests' reports about temple business and their requests for more funding. The requests for funding are constant. Every priest believes their god deserves a bigger temple, more offerings, and additional staff. You've become skilled at the political dance of appearing to consider every request seriously while committing to nothing specific. Between temples, you're carried on a litter by bearers who move with synchronized precision, making the journey smooth enough that you could probably balance a cup of wine on your head without spilling a drop. Not that you've tried. That would be undignified. The streets are crowded with people who've come out to see you pass, and you maintain the appropriate expression of benevolent divine authority, while privately wondering if you remembered to have someone check on your favourite hunting dog, who seemed a bit off yesterday. By mid-morning, you're back at the palace for the less spiritual but equally important part of being Pharaoh, actually running the country. The audience hall is already filling with people who need something from you. Officials, nobles, foreign ambassadors, priests, architects, merchants, farmers with disputes, criminals awaiting judgment, and that one persistent inventor who keeps trying to convince you to fund his revolutionary new irrigation system that will definitely work this time. Unlike the last 3 times, you settle onto your throne, which is magnificent and uncomfortable in equal measure. It's designed to make you look powerful, not to provide lumbar support. The throne is gold-plated, inlaid with ivory and ebony, and carved with images of you defeating enemies, communing with gods, and generally being excellent at everything. The arms are shaped like rearing cobras, which looks impressive but means you have to be careful not to scratch yourself on the cobra fangs when you adjust your position. Your vizier, Ptahhotep, approaches with the day's agenda. He's been your second in command for 5 years now, and you trust him more than almost anyone. He's brilliant and efficient and has the rare quality of being willing to tell you when you're wrong, but doing it in such a diplomatic way that you don't feel like having him thrown to the crocodiles. He's also apparently immune to boredom, which is essential when dealing with palace administration. The first matter is a border dispute between 2 provincial governors who both claim the same stretch of farmland. The dispute has been going on for 3 years, which seems excessive for an argument about dirt, but apparently this particular dirt is extremely fertile and produces exceptional barley. Both governors are present, each with scrolls of evidence, witnesses and arguments prepared. You let them present their cases, which takes approximately forever and involves a lot of dramatic gesturing and appeals to ancient precedents. The truth is, you could probably solve this by simply declaring one of them the winner and moving on. You're Pharaoh. Your word is law. But you've learned that arbitrary decisions, even when you have the power to make them, tend to create resentment and problems down the line. So you listen, ask questions, and eventually propose a solution that involves surveying the land properly, splitting it based on the survey results, and both governors contributing to a new irrigation project that will benefit the entire region. Neither governor looks entirely happy, which probably means it's a fair solution. Next is a delegation from Nubia with tribute and trade proposals. The Nubians are skilled diplomats who've dressed in their finest. Gold jewellery that rivals your own, fine fabrics, and elaborate hairstyles. They present their gifts with appropriate ceremony. Gold, ivory, ebony, exotic animal skins, and a live leopard that seems less than thrilled about being a diplomatic gift. The leopard is beautiful, but looks like it's considering making a break for freedom, which would certainly liven up the proceedings. You accept the tribute graciously, and listen to their trade proposals, which are actually quite reasonable. Nubia has resources Egypt needs, and Egypt has grain and manufactured goods Nubia wants. It's basic economics dressed up in diplomatic language. You agree to most of their requests, modify a few details, and send them away happy. The leopard goes to the royal menagerie, where hopefully it will feel less homicidal. Then there's the criminal case. A merchant is accused of using false weights to cheat customers. The evidence is presented, the weights in question, testimony from customers, and the merchant's protests of innocence. You examine the weights yourself, comparing them to the standard measures kept in the palace. They're definitely lighter than they should be, which means the merchant was selling people less grain than they paid for. Not the crime of the century, but dishonest nonetheless. Egyptian law is supposed to be based on Ma'at, truth, justice, harmony, and the fundamental order of the universe. In practice, it means trying to be fair while also making sure people don't think they can cheat each other with impunity. You find the merchant guilty and sentence him to pay back double what he stole plus a fine to the temple. It's stern enough to discourage others from trying the same thing, but not so harsh that it destroys the man's life. He leaves looking relieved that you didn't order anything involving crocodiles. The architect arrives with updated plans for your mortuary temple. This is the building that will serve as your cult centre after you die, where priests will make offerings to your memory for centuries. No pressure to make it impressive or anything. The architect unrolls papyrus after papyrus, showing you designs for courtyards, columns, statues and reliefs. Everything is calculated to inspire awe and demonstrate your divine nature to future generations. You suggest some modifications, a larger courtyard here, different proportions there, maybe fewer images of you smiting enemies and more of you making offerings to gods, because you want to be remembered as pious, not just violent. The architect makes notes, nodding enthusiastically at your ideas, even though you suspect he's going to gently talk you out of half of them later, by explaining various architectural principles you don't fully understand. Between official audiences, Ptahhotep updates you on the kingdom's finances. Egypt is wealthy, but wealth requires management. There are granaries to maintain, armies to pay, building projects to fund, temples to support, and foreign trade to manage. The Nile's flood this year was good, which means the harvest should be abundant, which means tax revenue should be solid. But there's always something. A warehouse that needs repairs, a garrison that needs supplies, a canal that needs dredging. You approve budgets, sign off on expenditures, and make decisions about resource allocation that would probably bore you to tears if they weren't so crucial to keeping Egypt functioning. The truth about ruling an empire is that it's less about dramatic pronouncements and more about making sure grain gets from where it's grown to where it's needed. Workers get paid, infrastructure gets maintained, and the complex machine of civilization keeps turning. A messenger arrives with news from the army. There's been a skirmish on the eastern border. Nothing major, just raiders testing Egypt's defences. Your general has handled it efficiently, but he's requesting additional troops to reinforce the garrison. You approve the request and dictate a response praising the general's vigilance. Military matters require careful attention. Egypt is powerful, but the world is full of neighbours who would love to claim a piece of the Nile's wealth. By early afternoon, you're ready for a break from audiences and administrative decisions. You retire to the private quarters of the palace, where the rooms are cooler, quieter, and significantly less formal. Here you can actually relax, or at least engage in the pharaonic version of relaxation, which still involves some level of ceremony, but with fewer people watching your every move. The palace is a city unto itself, a sprawling complex of buildings, courtyards, gardens, and halls. Your private quarters are in the heart of it all, protected by multiple layers of guards, walls, and protocol. The rooms are beautiful, painted walls showing gardens and wildlife, floors of polished stone, and furniture inlaid with precious materials. But they're also surprisingly comfortable. You've made sure of that. Yes, you're a god king, but you're also someone who appreciates a good chair. Your chief wife, Nefertari, is waiting in the garden courtyard. She's dressed more casually than you'd see her in public, still elegant, still wearing enough jewellery to fund a small army, but in lighter linen suitable for the afternoon heat. She's been dealing with her own administrative duties all morning. The royal household doesn't run itself, and she manages a staff of hundreds with the efficiency of a military commander. You discuss the day over light refreshments. She tells you about a dispute between two servants that she had to mediate, a request from the Temple of Hathor for her to attend an upcoming festival, and her concerns about your eldest son's education. He's showing more interest in hunting than in learning the administrative skills he'll need when he eventually becomes Pharaoh. You make a mental note to spend some time with him. Maybe find a way to make governance seem as exciting as chasing gazelles through the desert. The garden is one of your favourite places in the palace. It's an oasis of green in a landscape of stone and sand with carefully tended trees, flowers, and a pool stocked with fish. The Egyptians have managed to make gardens an art form, creating spaces that are both beautiful and functional. The trees provide shade, the flowers provide perfume, and the pool provides a spot for actual relaxation that doesn't involve sitting on a throne covered in angry cobras. You spend some time with your children, who are brought to you by their nurses. Royal children live somewhat separate lives from their parents. It's tradition, and also practical given the demands of kingship. But you make time for them when you can. Your daughter shows you a drawing she made, which is supposed to be a lotus flower, but looks more like an enthusiastic blob. you praise it appropriately. Your youngest son, who's about 3, is more interested in trying to grab your ceremonial beard, which is attached to your chin with some kind of ancient Egyptian adhesive technology that works better than it has any right to. These moments are precious, not because they're grand or ceremonial, but because they're normal. In these moments, you're not a pharaoh or a god, or the living embodiment of cosmic order. You're just a parent trying to keep a toddler from destroying your royal regalia while pretending to understand a child's artwork. Later, you review reports from your various estates. As pharaoh, you personally own significant amounts of land throughout Egypt, managed by stewards who send regular updates. The reports are written on papyrus in the neat hieratic script that scribes use for business documents, faster than hieroglyphs, though significantly less impressive looking. You've learned to read these reports quickly, scanning for important information while skipping the elaborate formalities that every scribe feels compelled to include. This estate had a good harvest. That estate had some problems with locusts, but managed to save most of the crop. This estate steward is requesting permission to build a new irrigation channel. That estate steward wants to know if you'd like any of the particularly fine cattle they've bred. You make notes, approve or deny requests, and generally ensure that your personal wealth, which is considerable, is being managed competently. There's a relaxing interlude of music. You have court musicians who are genuinely talented, not just employed because they're good at flattering the pharaoh. A harpist plays while you recline on a comfortable couch, the music filling the room with something beautiful and temporary and completely divorced from politics or religion or responsibility. The harp is a beautiful instrument, its sound clear and resonant, and the musician's fingers move across the strings with practiced grace. You close your eyes and just listen. The music washes over you, and for a few minutes your mind is empty of border disputes, budget concerns, diplomatic negotiations, and theological responsibilities. There's just the music, the cool air from the garden, and the distant sound of the palace continuing its daily business without you. A bath follows, which is less a quick rinse and more an elaborate process involving servants, oils, and water at exactly the right temperature. The bath is in a dedicated room with a limestone tub that's been polished smooth by years of use. The water is scented with lotus oil, and as you sink into it, you feel muscles relax that you didn't realise were tense. Being a pharaoh is physically demanding in ways people don't often consider. All that standing, sitting on uncomfortable thrones, wearing heavy jewellery, and maintaining perfect posture. Your body keeps a running tally. The afternoon heat is building, and the palace has grown quiet during the hottest hours. This is when sensible people rest, and even pharaohs need to be sensible occasionally. You retire to your sleeping quarters, where the air is cooler thanks to thick stone walls and servants who've been waving fans and sprinkling water on reed mats. You lie down on your bed, the same one you woke up in this morning, and let yourself drift into sleep. The afternoon nap is sacred. Not theologically sacred, just personally sacred. It's one of the few parts of your day that's entirely your own, where nobody needs anything from you and you don't need to make decisions about anything more important than which side to sleep on. The palace knows not to disturb you unless something is literally on fire, and even then, they'd better be sure it's a really important fire. You wake refreshed as the worst heat of the day begins to fade. The Nile is calling, not literally, though in poetry and hymns the Egyptians certainly write about the river like it speaks. And you've decided to take a journey on the royal barge. The Nile is Egypt's lifeline, its source of water, food, transportation, and fertility. Understanding the river means understanding your kingdom, and besides, it's pleasant to be on the water when the air is cooling and the light is turning golden. The royal barge is magnificent, which is practically a requirement for anything associated with royalty, but it's also surprisingly practical. It's large enough to be stable, decorated enough to be impressive, and equipped with a cabin that provides shade and privacy. The boat itself is painted in bright colours, red, blue, green and gold, with the sacred eye of Horus on the prow to ward off evil. The oarsmen are skilled professionals who can navigate the Nile's currents with the kind of precision that comes from years of practice. You board with a small retinue, some guards, a few servants, Tar Hotep, who apparently never takes time off, and a priest because you're still Pharaoh and still connected to the divine, even when you're just taking a boat ride. The barge pushes away from the dock and immediately you feel the difference. On land, you're surrounded by stone and politics. On the water, there's movement, air, and a sense of freedom that's rare when you're responsible for an entire civilization. The Nile flows northward, which confuses foreigners until you explain that in Egypt, north means downstream toward the Mediterranean, and south means upstream toward Nubia. The current carries you gently along, and when the wind is right, the sail can catch it and supplement the oarsman's efforts. Today the wind is perfect, filling the sail with a satisfying snap of fabric, and the boat glides along with minimal effort. From the water, you see Egypt differently. The riverbanks are lined with green, the fertile strip of land where everything grows, where life is possible, and where your people farm and build and live. Beyond the green is the desert, the red land stretching away to distant horizons. The contrast is stark. Green means life, red means death. The Nile creates the green by flooding every year, depositing rich silt that makes Egypt's soil some of the most fertile on earth. You pass villages and towns, their mud brick buildings clustered near the water. People working in the fields look up and see the royal barge, recognizing it by its decoration and size. Some wave, some bow, some simply stare. You're a distant figure to most Egyptians, more symbol than person, and moments like this, where they can actually see you, even from a distance, matter more than you might think. Fishermen in small papyrus boats are working their nets. The ancient dance of casting and pulling that's been performed on the Nile since before the pyramids were built. Fish are plentiful in the river, perch, catfish and tilapia, and fishing provides food for millions. You watch one fisherman make a perfect cast, the weighted net spreading into a circle before dropping into the water. It's a simple act, but there's grace in it, skill in it, and the kind of practical mastery that keeps civilization fed. Fields stretch away from the river, green with growing grain. This is barley and emmer wheat, the crops that make bread and beer, the staples of the Egyptian diet. Farmers are working the irrigation channels, directing water from the river to their fields through a network of canals and basins that represent centuries of engineering knowledge. The system works because people understand the Nile's rhythms and know when to flood the fields, when to plant, and when to harvest. You pass a temple under construction, its limestone walls gleaming white in the afternoon sun. Workers are everywhere, hauling stones, mixing mortar and carving decorations. Building a temple is a massive undertaking that can last years or even decades, employing hundreds of workers and consuming resources on a scale that would bankrupt smaller kingdoms. But temples are investments in the divine, in Ma'at, and in the cosmic order that keeps Egypt prosperous. They're also, admittedly, very effective ways to demonstrate pharaonic power to anyone who needs reminding. The barge stops at a landing where local officials are waiting. This is part of the purpose of the journey, being seen, hearing concerns and maintaining the connection between Pharaoh and people. The officials present themselves with appropriate ceremony, and you listen to their reports about the harvest, local disputes that have been resolved, and requests for assistance with various projects. It's kingship on a smaller scale, more personal than the audiences at the palace, but just as important. A farmer approaches, nervous but determined. He's been granted an audience because his farm produces exceptional wine, and he's brought a sample for your consideration. You try the wine, it's actually quite good, with a complexity that surprises you, and compliment him on his work. His face lights up with pride, and you make a note to have the palace acquire more of his vintage. Supporting excellent craftsmen is part of your role, and besides, you enjoy good wine. Back on the barge, you continue downstream. The sun is getting lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The Nile reflects the colours, turning the water into something magical, and you understand why the ancient Egyptians saw divinity in everything. How could you not when the world produces beauty like this on a daily basis? You think about the river's cycle, how it floods every year with reliable precision, and how the ancient Egyptians built their entire calendar around this rhythm. Akhet, the inundation season, is when the river rises and covers the fields. Peret is the growing season, when crops are planted and tended. Shemu, the harvest season, is when all that work turns into food. 3 seasons, each essential, each dependent on the Nile doing what it's done for thousands of years. It strikes you sometimes how much depends on this river. If the flood is too small, there's famine. If it's too large, there's destruction. The Nile has to be just right year after year, or Egypt suffers. Your ancestors claim they could control the flood through their divine power, and you maintain that claim because pharaohs are supposed to control everything. But privately you know the truth. The Nile does what it will, and humans just try to adapt. You're grateful that in your reign so far the river has been kind. As the barge returns to the palace dock, the sun is setting and the evening meal awaits. Egyptian feasts are elaborate affairs, especially royal ones. And tonight is a formal dinner with high-ranking officials, foreign ambassadors, and nobles who've been angling for an invitation for months. You've changed from your day clothes into evening regalia. A fresh kilt, a different collar, and the kind of jewellery that catches lamplight and makes everything sparkle. The banquet hall is spectacular. Columns painted with lotus designs rise to a ceiling decorated with stars and sacred symbols. Oil lamps in elaborate bronze stands light the room with warm, flickering light. The floor is scattered with fresh lotus flowers, their scent mixing with frankincense from the censers. Tables are arranged in a U-shape with your seat at the head, elevated slightly so everyone can see you. Because even at dinner you're on display. Guests arrive in their finest clothes, which in Egypt means lots of pleated linen, lots of jewellery, elaborate wigs and enough eye makeup to supply a modern cosmetics counter for a year. The women's dresses are sheer enough to be slightly scandalous to foreign visitors, but perfectly normal by Egyptian standards. The men's kilts are crisp and white, their collars glittering with gold and semi-precious stones. Everyone has gone to considerable effort to look impressive, and the overall effect is dazzling. You take your seat and servants immediately begin bringing food. Egyptian feasts are not subtle affairs. There's roasted duck, goose, beef and fish prepared a dozen different ways. There's bread in various forms, flatbread, raised bread, and bread flavoured with honey or dates or coriander. There are vegetables, lettuce, onions, garlic, cucumbers and beans. There are fruits, figs, dates, pomegranates, and melons. There are sweets made from honey and nuts. There's enough food to feed everyone twice over, which is the point. Abundance demonstrates prosperity. Wine flows freely, served in elegant cups by servants who glide through the crowd with practised grace. The wine is good, some from your own estates, some imported from abroad. Egyptians love wine, though beer is more common for everyday drinking. Tonight is not an everyday occasion, though, so wine it is. You sip from a golden cup while watching the room, observing the social dynamics, the alliances forming and shifting, and the careful dance of court politics. Musicians play harps, lutes, drums, and a sistrum whose metallic rattle is supposed to please the goddess Hathor. The music is lively, meant to encourage celebration rather than contemplation. Dancers perform, their movements graceful and athletic, their costumes designed more for visual impact than coverage. Egyptian dancing involves a lot of acrobatic moves that look impossible, but that these performers make seem effortless. Between courses there's conversation. The ambassador from Hatti, Egypt's sometimes ally, sometimes rival to the north, discusses trade agreements and mutual defence. The high priest of Amun mentions, very casually, that the god's temple could benefit from some renovations. A provincial governor compliments your wisdom in resolving that border dispute earlier. Everyone is charming, polite, and carefully advancing their own interests while pretending they're just here for the pleasure of your company. You make conversation with practised ease, asking questions, listening to responses, and making the kind of small talk that oils the wheels of diplomacy. You compliment the ambassador's wife on her jewellery, Egyptian gold you notice, which is either a genuine preference or strategic flattery. You discuss architecture with a nobleman who's building a new villa. You listen to a merchant describe his recent trading expedition to Punt, a mysterious land to the south that produces frankincense, myrrh and exotic goods. The food keeps coming. There's a whole roasted ox that required most of the afternoon to prepare, There are delicate pastries that dissolve on your tongue. There are dates stuffed with nuts and honey that are probably too sweet but taste amazing anyway. You eat moderately, aware that overeating in public is undignified, but also aware that completely ignoring the food might offend the cooks who've spent days preparing this feast. Entertainment continues between courses. There are acrobats who form human pyramids and tumble across the floor with alarming precision. There are singers whose voices rise above the ambient noise, telling stories of gods and heroes and romantic adventures. There's a magician who performs illusions that you can't quite figure out but that delight the audience. Court entertainment is supposed to be impressive, and tonight's performers have clearly received that memo. As the evening progresses, the formality relaxes slightly. People are well fed, well watered with wine, and in the kind of good mood that comes from being warm, comfortable, and surrounded by abundance. Conversation grows louder, laughter more frequent. You allow yourself to relax too, to enjoy the moment rather than constantly analysing it. These gatherings serve political purposes, but they're also genuinely pleasant when you stop treating them as work. Nefertari is at your side, managing the social dynamics with her usual skill. She notices when someone feels ignored and draws them into conversation. She smooths over a potential argument between two nobles who've had too much wine. She signals servants to refill cups, clear plates, and adjust lighting. She makes it all look effortless, which is how you know she's working hard. Running a royal feast is its own kind of governance. Eventually the feast winds down. Guests begin to leave, offering elaborate thanks and compliments. You accept their gratitude with appropriate royal graciousness, privately relieved that you can soon retire to quarters where you won't have to be on anymore. The servants will spend hours cleaning up, but that's not your concern. Your concern is saying goodnight to the last few stragglers without being rude or appearing too eager to get rid of them. The next morning brings you to your greatest obsession and most enduring legacy, your building projects. Every pharaoh builds. It's practically a job requirement, but you've taken it to new levels. You're not just maintaining existing structures, you're creating monuments that will outlast you by millennia. Your mortuary temple, your additions to the great temple complexes, and the statues bearing your face. These will tell future generations that you were here, that you mattered, and that you did things worth remembering. You're at the construction site of your mortuary temple, accompanied by the chief architect, the project overseer, and approximately 1,000 workers who are currently moving stone blocks that weigh more than several people combined. The sound of construction fills the air, chisels on stone, wooden sledges scraping across sand, foremen shouting instructions and workers chanting rhythmic work songs to coordinate their efforts. The scale of the project is staggering. The temple complex will cover acres, with massive pylons at the entrance, courtyards surrounded by columns, hyper-style halls where forest-sized stone pillars create artificial shade, sanctuaries for the gods, and chambers for the rituals that will maintain your cult after death. Right now, it's a construction site, chaotic and dusty, but the architect's plans show you what it will become, and the vision is magnificent. You walk through the site, stepping carefully over tools and cut stone. Workers pause in their labour to bow as you pass, and you nod acknowledgement. These men, and they are almost all men, though women participate in some aspects of construction, are skilled professionals. The stone cutters can split granite with precision that seems impossible. The masons can fit blocks together so tightly that you couldn't slip a knife blade between them. The artists carving reliefs can turn flat stone into images so lifelike they seem ready to step off the wall. The architect shows you the foundation work for the Great Hall. Limestone blocks have been laid with mathematical precision, creating a level platform for the columns that will support the roof. Each block has been cut to exact specifications, its surfaces smoothed to near-perfect flatness. The ancient Egyptians don't have the tools future civilizations will develop, but they've mastered the art of working stone with copper tools, abrasives, and an apparently infinite capacity for patient, precise labour. You examine the columns being carved nearby. These will be papyrus-form columns, shaped like bundles of papyrus stems, topped with capitals that look like opened papyrus flowers. The symbolism is deliberate. Papyrus grows in the marshes of Lower Egypt, representing the northern part of your kingdom. The craftsmen are working on the decorative elements now, carving hieroglyphs that will describe your victories, your devotion to the gods, and your legitimate right to rule. The reliefs on the walls are taking shape under the artist's chisels. These aren't just decorative, they're narrative, theological, and political statements. Here you're shown making offerings to the gods, maintaining the cosmic order. There you're defeating enemies, protecting Egypt from chaos. In another scene, you're receiving the symbols of kingship from the gods themselves, visual proof of your divine mandate. The artists are working from approved designs, but within those parameters, they're creating art that will last for ages. A master sculptor is working on a colossal statue of you in the traditional pharaonic pose, standing, left leg forward, arms at your sides, wearing the Nemes headdress and holding royal insignia. The statue is carved from red granite quarried hundreds of miles south and transported here by boat and sledge at enormous effort and expense. It's not finished yet, the face needs more refining and details need to be added, but already it's impressive. The statue is 3 times your actual height, because subtlety is not the point here. The point is to inspire awe. You discuss proportions with the sculptor, who's been working on royal statues for decades. He explains the mathematical ratios that govern Egyptian art, the relationships between different body parts, the angles that create the ideal form, and the conventions that make a statue unmistakably pharaonic. Egyptian art isn't realistic in the way later cultures will define realism. It's idealized, formalized, and designed to represent truth rather than mere appearance. Your statue doesn't need to look exactly like you. It needs to look like the eternal, perfect idea of you. The overseer shows you the work schedule. Thousands of workers are employed on this project alone, organised into teams with specialised skills. There are quarrymen, haulers, masons, carvers, painters, plasterers, tool makers, cooks to feed everyone, scribes to track supplies and wages, and foremen to coordinate efforts. It's a massive logistical undertaking that requires careful planning, consistent resources, and competent management. You ask about the workers' conditions because, despite what future people will believe, these aren't slaves. They're paid labourers, some working full-time, others fulfilling their annual labour obligation to the state. They receive rations of grain, beer, vegetables, and occasionally meat. They have off days for festivals. They live in purpose-built worker villages with houses, medical care, and even a kind of a labour dispute resolution system. It's not luxury, but it's also not the brutal oppression that pyramids and slavery myths would suggest. The project is on schedule, the overseer assures you, though on schedule for ancient Egyptian construction means years or decades. You won't see this temple completed. Your successor might not see it completed, but it will be completed, and when it is, it will stand as a testament to your reign, your devotion to the gods, and your determination to be remembered. You visit the workshops where artisans are creating the smaller but still important elements, the gold leaf that will cover certain surfaces, the precious stone inlays, the bronze doors, and the elaborate furniture for the temple's various chambers. Each item is being made by hand by craftsmen who learn their skills from masters who learned from their masters, maintaining traditions that stretch back generations. There's something profound about watching these works take shape. Every chisel strike, every careful measurement, and every artistic decision is an act of creation that will outlast everyone involved. The workers will die, you will die, even the gods might change, but these stones will remain, these images will endure, and these hieroglyphs will continue telling your story to people who haven't been born yet. It's as close to immortality as humans get. As evening approaches, you find yourself on the palace roof, watching the sun descend toward the western desert. This has become something of a ritual for you, a quiet moment at the end of the day to think, to process, to simply exist without the weight of performance. Up here, with the city spreading out below and the desert beyond, you can see your kingdom in microcosm. The Nile cuts through the landscape like a dark ribbon, reflecting the sunset colours. Along its banks, fields are darkening from green to black as the light fades. Towns and villages are coming alive with lamplight, tiny golden points appearing as families settle in for the evening. Smoke rises from cooking fires, carrying the smell of bread and grilled fish. Somewhere in the distance you can hear singing, probably from a tavern where workers are relaxing after the day's labour. You think about the enormity of your responsibility. Those lights represent people, millions of them, who depend on you to maintain Ma'at, to keep the Nile flowing, the harvest coming, the border secure, and the gods satisfied. You didn't ask for this responsibility. You were born into it, trained for it from childhood, had it placed on your head with a crown, and declared inevitable by every priest and official in Egypt. But you've accepted it, and most days you believe you're doing an adequate job. The concept of Ma'at occupies your thoughts often. It's more than just law or justice. It's cosmic order, the way things should be, the balance between chaos and civilization. Your entire reign is judged by how well you maintain Ma'at. Do you speak truth? Do you ensure fair judgment? Do you support the gods' temples? Do you keep Egypt prosperous and secure? Every decision you make is supposed to reinforce order and push back against chaos. Is Fet, the force that wants to unmake everything. It's an impossible standard, really. You're human. Despite what the theology says, you make mistakes. You have biases. You get tired and cranky and occasionally make decisions because they're easier, rather than because they're right. But you try. Every morning you wake up and try to be the Pharaoh Egypt needs, the living Horus, the son of Ra, the shepherd of the people. You think about mortality, which is ironic considering you're supposed to be divine. But divinity doesn't make you immune to death. It just means you're expected to continue being important after death. Your tomb is being prepared in the Valley of the Kings, cut deep into the mountain rock, its walls covered with religious texts and images to guide you through the afterlife. Your burial goods are accumulating. Furniture, clothes, jewellery, food, everything you might need in the next world. The ancient Egyptians have made an art form of dealing with death. You don't just die, you transform, journey through the underworld, face judgment before the gods. And if you pass, join the blessed dead who live forever. The Book of the Dead, which isn't actually a book but a collection of spells and instructions, will be placed in your tomb to help you navigate the dangers of the afterlife. You've read it, of course. It's comforting in a way. All those detailed instructions about what to say and do, as if death is just another journey that can be planned for. Your accomplishments run through your mind like a scroll unrolling. Treaties negotiated, temples built, enemies defeated, laws enacted, canals dug, and justice administered. Some of it was significant, some of it will be forgotten by next year. But you've tried to make Egypt better than you found it, to leave something lasting. Those buildings rising from the desert floor, those inscriptions on temple walls, those legal precedents, they're your legacy, the proof that you existed and mattered. But there are failures too, things you regret, hasty decisions that caused problems later, people you trusted who betrayed that trust, projects that consumed resources but delivered little, moments when you chose political expediency over justice because the alternative seemed too costly. The weight of rule includes carrying those failures, learning from them if possible, and accepting them when learning isn't enough. The sun touches the horizon, and the sky erupts in reds and oranges and purples. The Egyptians believe the sun god Ra travels through the underworld each night, fighting the serpent of chaos, ensuring the sun rises again each morning. You've helped that process through your rituals, but watching the sunset, you wonder if Ra needs the help, or if the sun would rise anyway. Theology says one thing, your secret thoughts sometimes suggest another. You think about your children and what kind of Egypt they'll inherit. Your eldest son will likely be the next pharaoh. The royal succession in Egypt isn't always straightforward. He's young still, more interested in the glory of kingship than its tedious reality. You hope he'll learn and hope he'll understand that being pharaoh means more responsibility than power. You hope he'll be wise enough to listen to good advisors and strong enough to ignore bad ones. The stars are appearing now, familiar constellations the Egyptians have named and mapped and incorporated into their religious beliefs. Those stars will be there long after you're gone, looking down on future pharaohs, future Egypts, and future worlds you can't imagine. It's humbling in a way to think about the vastness of time and your tiny place in it, but it's also comforting. You're part of something larger than yourself, part of a chain of kings stretching back to Nama, who first united Egypt, and forward to rulers you'll never meet. The evening call to prayer rises from the temples, priests singing hymns to the gods, thanking them for the day, asking for their protection through the night. The sound carries across the city, and you find yourself humming along with the familiar melodies. You may be a pharaoh, but you're also a worshipper, someone who acknowledges powers greater than yourself. As darkness settles over Egypt, you feel the day's tensions releasing. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to maintain mayat or fail trying. But for now, this moment is enough. Standing on your palace roof, watching your kingdom settle into night, being simply yourself before you have to be Pharaoh again. You turn away from the view and head back inside, ready for the evening meal, for the rituals that will prepare you for sleep, and for another night's rest before another day's reign. The palace swallows you back into its routines, but you carry the peace of that rooftop moment with you, a reminder that underneath all the ceremony and responsibility, you're human, living a life measured in sunsets and decisions, trying to do right. In a world that rarely makes rightness easy, you lie in bed again, the day's circuit complete. Tomorrow you'll wake and do it all again. The rituals, the governance, the building, the responsibility. It's a rhythm as reliable as the Nile's flood, as predictable as the sun's daily journey. You're not immortal, despite the divine titles. You're a person doing a job that happens to involve being treated like a god. Your legacy will be stone and law, temples and treaties, children who carry your bloodline forward, and officials who learned from your decisions. Some of it will last millennia, some will be forgotten within a generation. Such is the nature of human endeavour. But for now, you sleep, knowing the sun will rise again because Ra travels through the night, or because the earth rotates, or because that's simply what suns do. Your job is to be there when it rises, to perform the rituals, to govern justly, and to maintain mat for another day. The weight of the crown rests on a stand nearby, silent and patient, waiting for morning. Outside, the Nile flows northward as it always has, carrying Egypt's life toward the sea. And in the eternal cycle of rising and setting, of flooding and planting and harvesting, of life and death and life again, you are Pharaoh, divine, mortal, powerful, vulnerable, responsible for everything, master of nothing but your intentions. Sleep comes gently, carrying you toward dreams of the perfect Egypt you build each night and wake to approximate each day. You stand on the Southampton dock this crisp April morning, watching your breath form small clouds in the air. The year is 1912, and before you rises something that makes the nearby buildings look like children's toys. Titanic towers above the waterfront, her black hull stretching so far in both directions that you actually have to turn your head to see where she begins and ends. 4 massive funnels painted in buff yellow with black tops reach toward the sky, each one wide enough to drive 2 automobiles through side by side. The noise around you creates a peculiar symphony. Stevedores shout to each other in dock language you can barely decipher, their voices mixing with the grinding of loading cranes and the constant clatter of luggage carts on cobblestones. Somewhere nearby, a street vendor calls out about fresh pastries, his voice nearly lost in the general commotion. Yet despite all this activity, you keep looking back at the ship because nothing else seems quite real by comparison. Your first-class ticket feels substantial in your gloved hand, the paper thick and official. It cost you more than many people earn in a year, but looking at Titanic now, you understand why. This isn't merely a ship. It's a statement about what human beings can accomplish when they decide nothing is impossible. The white superstructure gleams in the morning light, and you count the decks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, stacked like a tiered wedding cake designed by someone with extraordinary ambition. A steward in a crisp white Star Line uniform approaches you with practiced efficiency. His jacket buttons shine like tiny suns, and his cap sits at precisely the correct angle. He touches the brim politely and asks to see your ticket, which he examines with the careful attention of someone who knows exactly what to look for. Satisfied, he gestures toward a covered gangway that leads up to C deck, reserved exclusively for first-class passengers like yourself. "Welcome aboard, sir," he says, and you notice he doesn't shout despite the noise around you. His voice carries a quiet confidence that suggests he's said these words hundreds of times today alone. The gangway slopes upward at an angle that's gentle enough to manage easily, even though you're wearing your travelling clothes and still feeling the effects of last night's farewell dinner. Other first-class passengers walk ahead of you, women in enormous hats that require them to tilt their heads carefully when passing through doorways, and men in dark suits carrying walking sticks they probably don't actually need. Everyone moves with the unhurried pace of people who've never had to rush for anything in their lives. Halfway up the gangway, you pause and look back at Southampton. The city spreads out behind the docks, church spires rising above rows of buildings, smoke from morning fires drifting lazily upward. In a few minutes, you'll leave this view behind, and something about that moment feels significant. You're not particularly superstitious, but boarding the Titanic feels like stepping across a threshold into something new. At the top of the gangway, you step onto the ship itself, and the sensation surprises you. You'd expected to feel movement immediately, some sense of being on water, but Titanic is so massive that she barely registers the gentle swells in the harbour. The deck beneath your feet feels as solid as any floor in any building you've ever entered. For a moment, you almost forget you're on a ship at all. The entrance area on C deck opens before you, and your first impression is of warmth. The space glows with electrical lighting that doesn't flicker or smoke like gas lamps. Dark wood panelling covers the walls, polished to such a shine that you can almost see your reflection. The floor features intricate tilework in geometric patterns, and the ceiling rises high enough that the space feels open rather than confined. More stewards wait inside, directing passengers to all their accommodations. The air smells of fresh paint, new carpet, and something else. Maybe furniture polish or the particular scent of wood that hasn't yet absorbed the ocean's dampness. Everything looks so pristine that you wonder if you're the first person ever to walk here. A young steward with red hair and freckles steps forward, consulting a list. "Cabin number, sir?" You tell him, and he nods immediately, clearly having memorised the ship's layout. "B52, excellent. Just this way, please." He doesn't offer to carry your small travelling case because another crew member has already appeared to handle that task, moving with such efficiency that you barely noticed his approach. As you follow the steward deeper into the ship, you pass other passengers having their own first moments aboard. An elderly woman examines the light fixtures with evident approval. A businessman stands motionless in the middle of the corridor, apparently overwhelmed by the sheer grandeur. Two children press their faces against a window overlooking the harbour, their nanny trying unsuccessfully to encourage them toward their cabins. The corridors branch and turn, but your steward never hesitates. He knows every passage and stairway, guiding you through Titanic's interior with the confidence of someone who could do this blindfolded. You pass doorways marked smoking room and reading and writing room, catching glimpses of spaces furnished with overstuffed chairs and tables set with lamps. Then you're climbing a staircase, the main first-class grand staircase, though you don't know that yet. Your hand touches the balustrade, and the wood feels impossibly smooth under your gloves, worn to perfection by craftsmen who understood their trade. Above you, a glass dome lets in natural light that plays across every surface, creating an effect like being inside a kaleidoscope. At the top of the stairs, you pause again. This landing features a clock set into an ornate carved panel, showing two figures holding up the clock face. The detail in the carving catches your attention. Each fold of the figure's robes has been shaped with care, each expression thoughtfully rendered. Someone spent days, maybe weeks, creating this single decorative element. The clock shows honour and glory crowning time, your steward mentions, noticing your interest. Rather fitting for a maiden voyage, don't you think? You agree, though privately you're thinking that it's an ambitious motto for any ship, no matter how grand. Still, looking around at the perfection surrounding you, perhaps Titanic has earned the right to such confidence. The steward leads you along B-deck now, past more cabin doors with brass numbers gleaming in the electric light. Other passengers emerge from their own rooms, beginning to explore. You hear American accents, British inflections, and languages you don't immediately recognise. Titanic is carrying a cross-section of the world's wealthy, all drawn together by curiosity about this legendary vessel. Finally, you reach B-52. The steward produces a key and unlocks the door with a solid click that suggests quality hardware. He pushes it open and steps aside, allowing you to enter first. "Your luggage will arrive shortly," he says. "If you need anything at all, simply press the call button, and someone will attend to you immediately. Lunch is served at 1 o'clock in the dining saloon. Welcome aboard the Titanic, sir." He's gone before you can even think about tipping him, disappearing back into the corridor with practiced discretion. You stand in the doorway of your cabin, looking in at what will be your home for the next week, and realise that your understanding of luxury is about to be completely redefined. Your cabin is not what you expected. Somehow you'd imagined a ship's cabin would be small and cramped, a place to sleep between days spent on deck. But a B-52 opens before you like a comfortable hotel room that happens to be moving across the Atlantic. The sitting room, because this cabin has multiple rooms, measures perhaps 12 feet by 14, with genuine windows rather than portholes. Through the glass you can still see Southampton Harbour, the water choppy with morning wind. The walls wear a soft cream-coloured fabric above dark mahogany wainscoting. This isn't paint trying to look like fabric. You can see the actual weave when you look closely. The furniture includes a sofa upholstered in rose-coloured material, 2 armchairs, a writing desk with its own chair, and a coffee table displaying a small vase of fresh flowers. Real flowers. Someone placed fresh flowers in your cabin before you arrived. You walk to the desk and run your finger along its surface. Not a single rough spot, not one imperfection. The wood grain flows in patterns that suggest this piece was crafted from a single, yes, high-quality board rather than assembled from scraps. A blotter sits ready with several sheets of white star-line stationery, the paper so thick you could probably use it as cardstock. Next to it, someone has placed a fountain pen and a small brass bell for summoning the steward. The bedroom opens off the sitting room through a wide doorway. Here the colour scheme shifts to gentle greens and creams, creating an atmosphere of restfulness. The bed itself is larger than you'd thought possible on a ship. A full double bed with a brass frame and a mattress that, when you press it experimentally, feels as comfortable as any in a luxury hotel. The headboard features more of that intricate carving you're beginning to recognise as Titanic's signature detail. A wardrobe stands against one wall, already open to reveal hanging space that could accommodate several trunks worth of clothes. More drawers than you'll probably need occupy a dresser. Above it hangs a mirror in a gilded frame, and you catch a glimpse of yourself, still in travelling clothes, hair slightly mussed from the morning's activities, looking somewhat stunned by your surroundings. The bathroom makes you actually laugh out loud. You've stayed in expensive hotels that didn't have bathrooms this well appointed. A full-sized bathtub sits on decorative claw feet. The porcelain's so white it almost glows. Both hot and cold running water flow from taps that feel substantial in your hands. A sink with its own mirror occupies one corner. The toilet is modern and connected to a proper plumbing system. Thick towels hang from heated racks, and someone has provided soap that smells faintly of lavender. You turn on the hot water tap just to see what happens. After a moment's wait, steam begins rising from the stream, and you realise that you're going to be able to take a hot bath in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The absurdity of that luxury, the sheer improbability of it, strikes you as both wonderful and slightly ridiculous. Back in the sitting room, you discover more details. The electrical lighting can be adjusted with switches on the wall. No more fumbling with gas valves or oil lamps. A small bookshelf holds a selection of volumes, including what appears to be a ship's directory. You pull this out and flip through it, discovering maps of every deck, lists of facilities, and menus from various restaurants. Titanic isn't just large, she's complex. A floating city with more amenities than you could explore in a week. A knock at the door announces the arrival of your luggage. Two stewards enter with your trunk and bags, moving with choreographed efficiency. They know exactly where things should go, placing your trunk at the foot of the bed, hanging your travelling coat in the wardrobe, and setting your smaller bags on the dresser. The whole operation takes perhaps 90 seconds, and then they're gone, one of them having somehow slipped a copy of the day's schedule onto your desk without you noticing. You pick up the schedule and scan it. Breakfast is served from 8 until 10:30. Bouillon in the cafe at 11. Lunch at 1. Tea at 4. Dinner at 7:30. Between meals, passengers can occupy themselves in the gymnasium, the swimming pool, the squash court, the libraries, the smoking rooms, the lounges, or simply walking the decks. The schedule reads more like a country house party than a sea voyage. Through your window, you watch the final preparations for departure. More passengers continue boarding via the second-class gangway further down the ship. Cargo nets swing loads into the holds. White uniformed crew members move along the decks, checking equipment, securing hatches, and performing the 1,000 small tasks required before a ship can leave port. You decide to unpack, though you're aware that this is something your personal valet would normally handle. But you didn't bring a valet on this trip, partly because you're travelling alone, and partly because you sometimes enjoy doing things yourself. You open your trunk and begin hanging suits in the wardrobe, placing shirts in drawers, and arranging your personal items on the dresser. Your neighbour in cabin B54 apparently has no such independence. Through the wall you hear voices, a gentleman giving instructions to what must be his valet, discussing which evening clothes to prepare for dinner tonight. The walls are thick enough that you can't make out individual words, just the rise and fall of conversation. But it reminds you that you're surrounded by people of means, folks accustomed to being served. The ship's horn sounds suddenly, so deep and loud that you feel it in your chest rather than just hearing it. The departure signal. You abandon your unpacking and hurry to the window, watching as the gangways are pulled back and the mooring lines are cast off. For several minutes nothing seems to happen. Then, almost imperceptibly, the view through your window begins to change. Buildings start sliding past. The dock pulls away. Titanic is moving. Grab your coat and head for the deck, wanting to experience this moment in the open air. The corridors are full of other passengers with the same idea, all of us flowing toward the exits like water-finding channels. Nobody runs. We're all too dignified for that, but everyone moves with purpose. On deck, the wind hits you immediately, cold and sharp with April chill. You should have brought a heavier coat, but you're too excited to care. Southampton spreads out to port now, the city growing smaller as Titanic makes her way down the channel toward open water. Other ships sound their horns in greeting. People on shore wave handkerchiefs and hats. You find yourself waving back, though you don't know any of them. Other first-class passengers line the railing with you. Nobody says much. We're all caught up in the moment, watching England recede, beginning this grand adventure. A woman next to you dabs at her eyes with a handkerchief. A man lights a cigar, the smoke whipping away instantly in the wind. Children point at seabirds wheeling overhead. The deck beneath your feet vibrates with engine power, a deep thrumming that you feel through your shoes. Titanic moves with surprising grace for something so enormous, cutting through the water as though it offers no resistance. Wakes spread behind the ship in wide white trails. The four funnels above release steam in controlled bursts. The sound is like giant sighs. You stay on deck for perhaps half an hour, watching until Southampton disappears from view and only open water surrounds the ship. Other passengers gradually drift away, heading back inside to warmth and comfort. Eventually you follow, your fingers numb from cold, but your spirits high. Back in your cabin, everything looks exactly as you left it, except that someone has been in to light a small fire in the electric heater. The room glows with warmth and welcome. You finish unpacking, hanging the last of your clothes, placing your books on the shelf, and arranging your personal items until the space feels like yours. Then you stretch out on the sofa, listening to the ship's sounds, the distant hum of engines, the creak of woodwork adjusting to motion, footsteps in the corridor outside, and the muffled conversations of other passengers settling into their own cabins. The window shows only ocean now, grey-green water stretching to the horizon under an overcast sky. You think about that clock on the grand staircase with honour and glory crowning time and smile. Perhaps that's exactly what this voyage is. A moment when human achievement reaches a pinnacle, when everything seems possible, when luxury and engineering combine to create something genuinely remarkable. Your eyes grow heavy. The gentle motion of the ship, the warmth of the cabin, and the comfort of the sofa all conspire to make you drowsy. You didn't sleep well last night, too excited about today's departure. Now that excitement is giving way to contentment, a deep satisfaction with your surroundings and circumstances. Outside your window, Titanic carries you toward America. Moving through the Atlantic swells with power and grace. But in this moment, all of that seems distant. You're warm, comfortable, surrounded by luxury, and beginning an adventure that will become a story you'll tell for the rest of your life. You wake from your sofa nap to the sound of the bugle call for lunch, its notes floating through the corridors with cheerful insistence. Checking your pocket watch, you're surprised to find it's already past 12:30. The morning has vanished into unpacking and settling in, and now your stomach reminds you that breakfast was many hours ago. After refreshing yourself in that magnificent bathroom, splashing cold water on your face, straightening your collar, running a comb through your hair, you step out into the B-deck corridor. Other cabin doors are opening as well, passengers emerging like butterflies from chrysalises, everyone dressed appropriately for midday dining. The women wear afternoon dresses in soft colours. The men sport lounge suits rather than formal dinner attire. We're all finding our sea legs together, learning the rhythms of shipboard life. You follow the general flow of passengers toward the dining saloon, but take your time, wanting to see more of this remarkable ship. The corridors branch and connect in ways that will take days to fully understand. Every passage offers something worth noticing, a painting of ships at sea, a decorative mirror, or a carved panel depicting nautical themes. Nothing looks mass-produced or generic. Every detail suggests careful planning by people who care deeply about getting things right. You climb the grand staircase again, and this time you pause on each landing to examine the carved oak panelling. The wood grain flows like water frozen in mid-movement. Your hand on the balustrade feels the silky smoothness that comes only from patient craftsmanship. Above you, the glass dome filters the afternoon light into something soft and golden, making everyone look slightly better than they do in ordinary daylight. On a deck you discover the promenade, a covered walkway that runs the length of the ship, lined with windows on one side and cabin doors on the other. Deck chairs arranged in neat rows wait for passengers seeking fresh air, without the full force of Atlantic wind. You can see the ocean through those windows, watch the waves rolling past and observe the horizon line tilting gently as Titanic moves through the swells. A few hardy souls already occupy deck chairs, wrapped in blankets provided by attentive stewards. An elderly gentleman reads a newspaper, the pages snapping in the breeze each time a door opens. Two women sit close together, conversation animated, hands moving expressively. A young couple stands at the railing looking out at the water, standing close but not quite touching. That careful distance that suggests courtship rather than marriage. You continue exploring, discovering the reading and writing room with its white wicker furniture and delicate colour scheme clearly designed to appeal to female passengers. Next door, the lounge offers more masculine comfort, leather chairs, dark wood, and tables perfect for cards or conversation. The smoking room lies further forward, its stained glass windows and ornate ceiling creating an atmosphere of a gentleman's club transported to sea. But it's the general room, a spacious area near the entrance, that truly captures the ship's spirit. Here, passengers gather naturally, drawn by comfortable furniture arranged in conversational groupings. A piano sits in one corner, though nobody plays it at the moment. Potted palms add greenery, their leaves creating small private spaces within the larger public area. The ceiling rises 2 decks high, making the space feel more like a hotel lobby than part of a ship. You observe how people inhabit this space. Some sit alone, reading books or writing letters. Others form small groups, conversation flowing with the ease of travellers sharing common experience. A few children play a quiet game in one corner, supervised by nannies who chat among themselves. Everyone seems relaxed, comfortable, and already adapting to life aboard Titanic. The attention to comfort extends to temperature. The ship maintains perfect warmth throughout. Not the stuffy heat of over-fired rooms, but a gentle climate that makes you forget you're wearing your coat. Hidden vents circulate fresh air, and you never smell that stuffiness that accumulates in closed spaces. Someone engineered these systems with remarkable sophistication. Following your nose and the increasing number of passengers, you find your way to the dining saloon. The entrance takes your breath away. The room stretches the full width of the ship, with tables arranged in precise rows that could seat hundreds. Windows along both sides let in natural light. The ceiling arches overhead, cream-coloured with ornate moulding that draws the eye upward. Chairs upholstered in deep red provide splashes of colour against the neutral walls. White tablecloth cover every surface, so bright they almost hurt to look at directly. Crystal glassware catches and reflects light. Silver cutlery lines each place setting with mathematical precision. Fresh flowers bloom in vases on every table. The overall effect suggests a very fine restaurant that happens to be crossing the Atlantic. A steward in formal attire materialises at your elbow. "Table for one, sir?" You confirm, and he guides you to a small table near one of the windows. As you're seated, you notice how the room fills with passengers, families, couples, and solo travellers like yourself. The noise level rises, but never becomes overwhelming. People speak in modulated tones, maintaining that atmosphere of refined civilization, even as hundreds of conversations happen simultaneously. Your table settings include more pieces of silverware than you strictly need for any meal. Working from the outside in, you remember from some half-forgotten etiquette lesson. The menu, presented in an embossed folder, offers choices that would impress even the most demanding diner. For lunch, this is the selection available for a casual midday meal. You can choose from consommé or cream soup. Fish courses include salmon with mousseline sauce. Meat options range from chicken to lamb to beef, each with its own accompaniments. Vegetables come separately: asparagus, potatoes prepared 3 different ways, and fresh peas despite it being only April. Desserts take up an entire section of the menu. Even the cheese selection requires careful consideration. You order modestly: soup, fish, vegetables, perhaps a light dessert, aware that dinner will be a much more substantial affair. The steward nods approvingly and glides away, moving between tables with practiced efficiency. While waiting for your food, you observe your fellow diners. The diversity of the first-class passengers surprises you. Yes, there are obvious millionaires, men whose names you recognise from newspapers, and women dripping with jewellery even at lunch. But there are also middle-aged couples who might be successful merchants, younger people who could be inheriting family wealth, and older passengers who've clearly been rich long enough to wear it comfortably. The soup arrives in delicate china, steaming gently, and tastes exactly as good as it looks. The fish follows, perfectly cooked, flaking easily under your fork. Everything is served at the correct temperature, seasoned properly, and presented beautifully. You're eating better than you do in most restaurants ashore, and you're doing it while travelling at more than 20 knots across the Atlantic. Through the window beside your table, you watch the ocean roll past. The water today looks grey-green under cloudy skies, but you can see how it might turn brilliant blue under better weather. Waves rise and fall in patterns that never quite repeat. Occasionally the spray catches the wind and creates momentary rainbows before disappearing. After lunch you wander outside to the boat deck, the highest deck accessible to passengers. The wind up here blows stronger, carrying the salt smell of the ocean and the faint tang of smoke from the funnels. You walk toward the stern, passing ventilation equipment, past the entrance to the gymnasium, and around the base of those massive funnels that dominate the upper deck. Other passengers have the same idea. We stroll in informal groups, taking constitutional walks, getting exercise, and enjoying the fresh air despite the chill. Nobody rushes. There's nowhere to rush to, after all. The beauty of ocean travel lies partly in this enforced leisure, this necessary slowing down. You lean against the railing at the stern and look back at Titanic's wake. A wide white path stretching toward the horizon, evidence of the ship's passage through the Atlantic. The propellers churn beneath the surface, driving this enormous vessel forward with relentless power. Yet standing here, you barely feel any vibration. The engineers who designed these engines understood their craft. A steward appears with a tray of bouillon in cups, offering it to passengers on deck. You accept one gratefully, wrapping your cold hands around the warm cup, sipping the rich broth. This is what luxury means, not just comfortable cabins and excellent food, but someone anticipating your needs before you voice them, appearing with hot soup exactly when the April wind makes you wish for warmth. You spend the afternoon exploring more of the ship. The swimming pool, located deep in the ship's interior, echoes with the sound of water and voices. The Turkish bath offers heated rooms and massage facilities. The squash court provides exercise for those energetic enough to want it. The libraries stock books in multiple languages. Everywhere you go, you find evidence of careful planning, of designers who try to imagine every possible passenger need and meet it. The bugle call for dinner sounds at 7 o'clock, giving passengers 90 minutes to prepare for the evening meal. In your cabin, you've laid out your formal dinner clothes. White tie and tails, the uniform of first-class evening dining. The bow tie gives you trouble, as it always does. You fumble with it for several minutes before achieving something that looks approximately correct. The transformation of passengers between afternoon and evening remains one of shipboard life's small miracles. The same people who lounged in casual clothes at lunch now emerge from their cabins looking like they're attending an opera or palace ball. The women especially have undergone complete metamorphosis. Afternoon dresses replaced by evening gowns that showcase the latest Paris fashions. Jewellery that probably required safe deposit boxes in their cabins, and hair arranged in elaborate styles that must have taken their maids an hour to create. You join the general flow toward the dining saloon, but the experience differs dramatically from lunch. The evening crowd moves more slowly, with more awareness of being on display. Ladies adjust their gloves, gentlemen check their pocket watches. We're all performing the ritual of dressing for dinner, an ancient tradition of civilization asserting itself even in the middle of the Atlantic. The dining saloon has transformed as well. The natural light of afternoon has given way to electric chandeliers that hang from the ceiling like crystallized starlight. Every bulb blazes, creating an atmosphere of almost theatrical brilliance. The white tablecloths look even brighter against the evening darkness visible through the windows. Candles on each table add flickering warmth to the electric glow. Your table assignment tonight places you with several other passengers, a system designed to encourage social mixing. You introduce yourself to your table mates, a railroad investor from Philadelphia and his wife, a British wool merchant travelling home from business in America, and a young couple whose fortune apparently derives from timber. Everyone maintains that careful politeness of strangers thrown together by circumstance. The menu for dinner requires serious study. This isn't lunch's modest selection. This is a document that describes what might be 10 separate courses. You read through the options with growing amazement. Oysters, hors d'oeuvres, soup, 2 kinds, both available if you want them. Fish with the elaborate sauces, an entree of chicken or lamb or beef, a poultry course separate from the entree, cold asparagus with vinaigrette, roasted meat, duckling, beef sirloin, spring lamb, various vegetables, punch sorbet to cleanse the palate, puddings, ice cream, fresh fruit, cheese and coffee. They feed us like Roman emperors, the wool merchant observes, studying his own menu with evident approval. I've crossed the Atlantic a dozen times, and I've never seen a menu quite like this. His comment prompts discussion of other voyages, other ships. The railroad investor prefers German liners for their engineering. The British merchant swears by Cunard for reliability. The timber couple, this is their first ocean crossing, listens with the fascination of newcomers hearing experienced travellers compare notes. You order carefully, knowing you can't possibly eat everything offered but wanting to experience the range of kitchen capabilities. The first course arrives, oysters on ice, each one looking perfect, tasting of cold salt water and the sea. You squeeze lemon over them and experience that peculiar sensation of eating something that was alive in the ocean just hours ago. The courses continue with clockwork precision. Soup appears exactly when you finish the oysters. Fish follows soup. Each plate arrives at the perfect temperature, arranged with artistic attention. Sauces complement without overwhelming. Vegetables retain their colour and texture. Everything tastes as good as it looks, which is saying something because it looks spectacular. Between courses, conversation flows around the table. The railroad investor discusses investment opportunities in American infrastructure, new rail lines pushing west, electrification of existing routes, and the endless appetite for expansion. His wife talks about their daughter's upcoming wedding and the challenges of planning a society event while travelling. The wool merchant offers dry observations about British textile markets and the quality of Australian imports. You notice how the dining saloon is filled with life as dinner progresses. Individual conversations combine into a general hum of voices, punctuated by occasional laughter. Silverware clinks against china. Crystal glasses ring gently when toasts are made. Stewards move constantly between tables, replacing dishes, refilling glasses, and anticipating needs before they're voiced. The orchestra begins playing during the main course, stationed on a small balcony overlooking the dining saloon. They perform light classical pieces and popular tunes, nothing too demanding or intrusive. The music provides oral wallpaper, creating atmosphere without commanding attention. Occasionally someone hums along, but mostly we eat and talk and let the melodies wash over us. You order the beef for your main course, and when it arrives, you understand why people pay premium prices for first-class passage. The meat has been cooked precisely to your specifications, the exterior dark and caramelized, the interior still showing a hint of pink. It cuts with minimal resistance and tastes rich without being heavy. The accompanying vegetables, tiny potatoes, fresh beans and glazed carrots, provide perfect complements. The young couple at your table holds hands between courses, a gesture they probably think goes unnoticed. The railroad investor's wife catches your eye and smiles, both of us seeing and choosing to ignore this small intimacy. Young love on an ocean voyage carries its own sweetness, and we're all old enough to remember when the world felt new. Dessert offers yet more choices. You select the chocolate pudding, which arrives in an individual portion that looks almost too pretty to disturb. But disturb it you do, and discover that it tastes even better than it looks. Rich chocolate balanced by cream, sweet without being cloying, the perfect ending to an excessive meal. Coffee follows dessert served in delicate china cups with sugar cubes and cream. Someone at a nearby table requests brandy, and suddenly several of us are ordering the same. The steward produces a bottle and pours generous measures into snifters, the amber liquid catching the light. You warm the glass between your palms, inhaling the complex aroma, then take a small sip that burns pleasantly down your throat. The meal has stretched past 2 hours, but nobody seems hurried. This is what evenings are for aboard Titanic. Leisurely dining, good conversation, and the pleasure of excellent food and wine in beautiful surroundings. Through the windows you can see complete darkness now. The ocean has disappeared into night. Only Titanic exists, a pocket of lightened civilization moving through the void. As dinner winds down, passengers begin departing in casual groups. The men drift toward the smoking room for cigars and further brandy. The women head to the lounges for conversation and perhaps cards. The young couple, predictably, escapes toward the deck for a romantic moment under the stars. You follow the men to the smoking room, curious about this male sanctuary. The space lives up to expectations, deeply masculine with all leather chairs and dark wood panelling. Stained glass windows depict maritime scenes. The ceiling features ornate plasterwork painted to resemble tooled leather. Every surface suggests wealth and permanence. Men settle into chairs with practiced comfort, loosening collar buttons and lighting cigars and cigarettes. The air quickly fills with smoke that hangs in blue-grey layers under the lights. Stewards circulate with trays of drinks. Someone calls for whiskey, another for port, and a third for more brandy. The bartender prepares each drink with professional efficiency. Conversation flows in the smoking room, but with a different quality than at dinner. Topics become more frank, opinions more freely stated. Someone discusses American politics with more heat than wisdom. Another passenger offers investment advice that might or might not be sound. A third tells a moderately scandalous story about a friend's business dealings that has everyone chuckling. You claim a leather chair near the window and nurse your brandy, content to listen rather than contribute. The chair embraces you with the comfort of expensive furniture, and the brandy creates a pleasant warmth in your chest. Outside, the ocean remains invisible, but you can hear waves against the hull, a rhythmic sound that becomes hypnotic if you pay attention. The railroad investor settles into the chair next to yours. "Remarkable ship," he says, more to himself than to you. You agree, because what else can you say? Titanic exceeds superlatives. "I've built things," he continues, staring at his glass. "Bridges, rail terminals, even a small dam once. But this..." He gestures vaguely at the room, the ship, and the entire enterprise. "This makes my accomplishments look like amateur efforts." You understand what he means. There's something about being aboard Titanic that makes you aware of human capability, of what we can achieve when we combine resources, knowledge, and ambition. This ship shouldn't exist. It's too large, too complex, and too luxurious. Yet here you sit, drinking brandy in a floating palace that moves across the Atlantic with the confidence of inevitability. The evening passes in a pleasant haze. More drinks arrive without being ordered, the steward somehow knowing when glasses are nearly empty. Conversation ebbs and flows. Some passengers depart for their cabins. Others settle deeper into their chairs, apparently planning to spend hours here. Eventually you decide you've had enough brandy and tobacco smoke. You excuse yourself and make your way back through corridors that have grown quiet. Most passengers have retired. The ship's night watch has taken over, maintaining Titanic's course while we sleep. Your cabin welcomes you with familiar comfort. Someone has been in to turn down your bed, leaving a small chocolate on the pillow, a detail so thoughtful you almost laugh. You prepare for bed, moving through the rituals of evening ablution in that magnificent bathroom. The ship rocks gently beneath you, a motion you're already beginning to find comforting rather than unsettling. In bed, you listen to Titanic's nighttime sounds. The engines maintain their steady thrumming. Water rushes along the hull. Somewhere distant, footsteps echo on metal stairs. Voices murmur in the corridor as late passengers return to their cabins. You think about dinner, about the food and wine and conversation. You think about the railroad investor's comment about human achievement and ambition. You think about being in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, surrounded by luxury that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. Sleep comes easily, pulling you down into dreams of light and motion, of endless dining tables and orchestras playing in the distance, of a ship moving through darkness toward tomorrow. Morning light through your cabin window wakes you gently, and for a moment you forget where you are. Then the ship's motion registers, that subtle rocking that has become familiar overnight, and memory returns. You're aboard the Titanic, somewhere in the Atlantic, with another day of the voyage ahead. After washing and dressing in casual clothes suitable for morning aboard ship, you make your way to the cafe for breakfast. This smaller dining area offers a more relaxed atmosphere than the grand dining saloon, with tables scattered informally and passengers coming and going at their own pace. You order eggs, toast, bacon and coffee, simple food, perfectly prepared. The day's programme, printed on fresh paper and delivered to your cabin while you slept, lists the morning's activities, gymnasium hours, swimming pool availability, divine service in the dining saloon at 10:30, inspection of the ship for interested passengers at 11. The schedule suggests possibilities without demanding participation, leaving you free to structure your day however you prefer. You decide to explore the gymnasium first, curious about this facility you've heard other passengers discussing. Located on the boat deck, the gym occupies a surprisingly large space fitted with equipment that looks both modern and slightly strange. Mechanical horses that simulate riding, rowing machines, something called an electric camel that apparently mimics desert travel, stationary bicycles, weight machines with pulleys and cables. The gymnasium instructor, a fit man in white flannels who introduces himself as Mr. Macaulay, demonstrates each machine with enthusiastic professionalism. He helps an elderly lady onto one of the mechanical horses, adjusting the settings for gentle motion. He shows a teenager how to use the rowing machine properly. He explains to you how the electric camel provides exercise without requiring actual camel ownership. "Rather marvellous, isn't it?" Mr. Macaulay says, patting the electric camel affectionately. "You can experience the exercise benefits of exotic travel without leaving the ship. Modern science is making the world smaller. You try several machines, finding them amusing more than challenging. The mechanical horse rocks back and forth with a steady rhythm, and you imagine you're cantering across some imaginary landscape. The rowing machine provides real resistance, and after 5 minutes your arms feel the effort. The electric camel lives up to its billing. It does indeed simulate the lurching motion of camel travel, though why anyone would want to simulate that particular experience remains unclear. After the gymnasium, you venture to the swimming pool located deep in the ship's interior. The descent takes you down several staircases, past machinery spaces and crew areas, until you reach a section clearly designed for passengers. The pool itself measures perhaps 30 feet long and 15 wide, filled with seawater that sloshes gently with the ship's motion. Tiles cover the walls in white and blue patterns. Changing rooms line one side. A few brave souls are actually swimming. A man doing determined laps. A young boy splashing near the shallow end under his mother's watchful eye. The water looks cold, and you decide to save swimming for another day. Instead, you explore the adjacent Turkish baths, a series of rooms decorated in Arabic style with colourful tiles and carved wooden screens. The baths offer gradual progression through increasingly warm rooms. The temperate room feels pleasant, like a sunny day. The hot room makes you start sweating within minutes. The steam room envelops you in vapour so thick you can barely see your hand in front of your face. Attendants in white robes move like ghosts through the steam, offering towels and glasses of cool water. You endure the heat for perhaps 20 minutes before retreating to the cooling room, where you wrap yourself in a thick robe and stretch out on a comfortable lounger. Your body feels loose and relaxed, and muscles you didn't know were tense are now releasing. Other passengers occupy nearby loungers, all of us looking slightly pink and very content. "First time in the baths?" asks a man with an impressive moustache on the next lounger. You confirm, and he nods knowingly. "Remarkable facility. I use Turkish baths regularly in London, and these rival the best I've experienced. Extraordinary that they've installed them on a ship." He's right, of course. The existence of Turkish baths aboard an ocean liner represents another example of Titanic's commitment to comprehensive luxury. Why should passengers sacrifice any comfort just because they're travelling? Why not bring every amenity of shore life to sea? After the baths, you return to your cabin for fresh clothes, then join the growing crowd gathering on the boat deck for the inspection tour. An officer in a crisp white uniform leads the group, explaining technical details as we walk. He shows us the bridge, where the captain and his officers navigate. He demonstrates the wireless equipment, those mysterious machines that can send messages through empty air. He explains the ship's watertight compartments, designed to keep Titanic afloat even if the hull suffers damage. "She's practically unsinkable," the officer says with understandable pride. "The designers thought of everything. These watertight doors can be closed instantly from the bridge, sealing off any flooding. Even if several compartments fill with water, the Titanic will remain afloat." The group murmurs appreciation. We're impressed by the engineering and reassured by the safety measures. Titanic represents the pinnacle of maritime technology, and standing on her deck, hearing these explanations, you feel confidence in the ship and the men who operate her. Lunch arrives with its usual variety and excellence. You eat lightly, saving your appetite for dinner. The afternoon stretches ahead with pleasant emptiness. Some passengers play cards in the lounges, others write letters in the library. A few brave souls walk the deck despite the April chill. You find yourself drawn to the reading and writing room, that feminine sanctuary done in delicate colours and white wicker furniture. Despite being designed for ladies, The room welcomes male visitors, and you claim a comfortable chair near the windows. Someone has left a book, a popular novel about adventure in Africa. You pick it up, intending to read just a chapter or two. The next time you check your pocket watch, 2 hours have passed. The story captured you completely, pulling you into fictional jungles and adventures that seem both exotic and slightly ridiculous. But that's what good entertainment does. It takes you somewhere else and lets you forget your surroundings completely. Tea service begins at 4 o'clock, and you make your way to the cafe for this very British ritual. The servers have laid out impressive spreads, sandwiches with the crusts removed, small cakes, pastries, and scones with jam and cream. Tea arrives in proper pots, strong and hot. You prepare yours with milk and sugar, the way your grandmother taught you decades ago. Other passengers gather for tea, and the cafe fills with quiet conversation. This meal, really more of a snack, provides opportunity for social mixing without the formality of dinner. People move between tables, greeting friends made yesterday, striking up conversations with strangers. A sense of community is building among the first-class passengers, that peculiar bonding that happens when people share an adventure. After tea, you return to the deck for a constitutional walk. The wind has picked up since morning, and the ocean looks rougher, with waves showing white caps. Titanic handles the swells with barely noticeable motion, but you can see spray occasionally reaching high enough to catch sunlight. The air tastes strongly of salt, and your face feels windburned after just minutes outside. You complete several circuits of the promenade deck, walking briskly enough to elevate your heart rate. Other passengers have the same idea: exercise before dinner, working up an appetite for the evening's feast. We nod to each other as we pass, fellow travellers sharing space and purpose. Back in your cabin, you rest before beginning the evening's preparations. The sun is setting, visible through your window as a golden glow on the horizon. The ocean catches this light and transforms it into something magical. The water appearing to hold fire, the waves edged in gold. You stand at the window and watch until the sun disappears completely, leaving only afterglow and the approach of night. Evening returns you to formal dress, to white tie and tails, to the transformation into your most elegant self. Dinner tonight features different table mates. The assignments rotate, ensuring passengers meet various people during the voyage. Your new companions include a steel magnate from Pittsburgh, a British lord travelling with his sister, and a doctor returning from a medical conference in New York. The conversation flows toward more intellectual topics than last night. The doctor discusses advances in surgery. The steel magnate offers thoughts on industrial development. The British lord, surprisingly well read, quotes poetry and philosophy. His sister listens with patient attention, occasionally contributing observations that reveal sharp intelligence. After dinner, you skip the smoking room and instead wander to the lounge where someone is playing the piano. The musician performs with real skill, moving from classical pieces to popular songs to improvised melodies that might be original compositions. A small crowd gathers, some people singing along softly, others simply listening. The music creates an atmosphere of gentle melancholy, beautiful but tinged with something indefinable. Perhaps awareness of time passing, of this voyage representing a brief moment outside ordinary life. Tomorrow Titanic will be further across the Atlantic, the day after, further still. Eventually this floating palace existence will end, returning us all to normal life ashore. But not tonight. Tonight you're here, listening to piano music in an elegant lounge surrounded by strangers becoming friends, carried across the ocean by this extraordinary ship. Tonight is enough. By the third day aboard, you've begun to recognise faces and remember names. The ship's social world has organised itself into loose groups based on shared interests and compatible personalities. You find yourself drawn to a particular cluster of passengers who gather in the lounge after breakfast. A mix of ages and backgrounds united by curiosity about fellow travellers and enjoyment of good conversation. The core group includes Margaret, a widow from Boston with sharp wit and bottomless energy. Thomas, a banker from Philadelphia who collects rare books and loves discussing literature, Edward, a British diplomat returning from posting in Washington, Sarah, a young woman travelling with her considerably older aunt, both heading to Italy for an extended stay, and you, the observer who sometimes becomes a participant. Your conversations range widely. Margaret tells stories about Boston society with humour that makes everyone laugh, while also revealing complex social dynamics. Thomas describes rare volumes he's acquired, his enthusiasm infectious even for those who don't share his passion for first editions. Edward offers insider perspectives on international relations, carefully avoiding anything too confidential. Sarah asks questions that reveal her intelligence and curiosity about the wider world. These morning gatherings become ritual. You claim the same area of the lounge, those comfortable chairs near the windows. Stewards learn your preferences and deliver coffee or tea without being asked. The conversations start casually, but often develop unexpected depth. Discussions of art, politics, philosophy, and the changing world of 19 to 12. Everything's accelerating, Thomas observes one morning, stirring sugar into his coffee. Technology, society, and even time itself seem to move faster. When I was young, life felt stable. Now each year brings dramatic changes. Progress, Edward says. Inevitable and mostly positive, though not without costs. I wonder if we're progressing towards something or just moving, Margaret muses. Speed doesn't necessarily indicate direction. These conversations make you think, challenge assumptions and open perspectives. You realise that one of luxury's true gifts is time. Time to think, to talk, to explore ideas without the pressure of schedules and obligations. Titanic provides space for intellectual leisure that modern life rarely permits. You also notice how the ship's environment encourages unexpected connections. One afternoon you strike up a conversation with an older gentleman on the promenade deck. He turns out to be a professor of history at Oxford, and you spend an hour discussing the fall of Rome while walking circles round the deck. His knowledge impresses you, but so does his ability to make ancient events feel relevant to contemporary life. Another time you end up playing bridge with three strangers, two sisters from New York and a mining engineer from Colorado. None of you play particularly well, but the game provides a framework for getting to know each other. You learn about their lives, their reasons for travelling, and their hopes and worries. By the end of the evening, you feel like you've made genuine friends, people you might actually stay in contact with after the voyage ends. The children aboard deserve special mention. Titanic carries perhaps 24 first-class children, ranging from infants to teenagers. They bring energy and spontaneity that contrast beautifully with adult formality. You often see them racing along corridors until their nannies call them back to decorum. They explore the ship with fearless curiosity, discovering spaces and perspectives that adults miss. One morning you encounter a small boy, perhaps 6 years old, standing at a window staring at the ocean with such intensity that you stop to see what he's watching. At first you see nothing unusual, just waves and horizon. Then you spot it, a distant whale, visible as a dark shape briefly surfacing before disappearing back into the depths. "Did you see?" the boy asks, turning to you with excitement that can't be contained. "A whale! An actual whale!" You confirm that yes, you saw it too, and the boy's face lights up with joy, which makes you smile for the rest of the day. That simple moment, a child's wonder at the natural world, provides more genuine pleasure than all of Titanic's manufactured luxuries. Social events punctuate the voyage's rhythm. One evening, the ship's officers host a reception, giving passengers the opportunity to meet the captain and crew who operate Titanic. Captain Smith appears exactly as you'd imagine a ship's captain should. White-bearded, dignified, and radiating calm competence. He moves through the crowd with practiced ease, spending a few minutes with each passenger, making everyone feel acknowledged. Another night features a concert by the ship's orchestra, transformed from background dinner music to featured performers. They play a full programme of classical and popular pieces, the musicians revealing skills that dinner service doesn't fully showcase. The lounge fills with passengers dressed in their evening finest, all of us enjoying culture in the middle of the Atlantic. You also observe the quiet romances developing aboard ship. That young couple from dinner the first night spends hours together on deck, talking and laughing, clearly falling deeper into love with each passing day. An older pair, he perhaps 60, she in her 50s, also seems to be discovering each other, their courtship more subtle but no less real. Ocean voyages apparently encourage romance, the enclosed world and temporary nature of the experience creating conditions where feelings develop quickly. Your own social experience includes several conversations with attractive women, encounters that might have developed into something more if circumstances were different. A charming widow invites you to walk the deck with her. A sophisticated woman your own age engages you in extended discussion about art and literature. In another context, these meetings might have led somewhere. But shipboard romance requires either quick development or acceptance of a temporary connection, and you find yourself preferring friendship to the complications of brief romance. The dining room continues providing theatre each evening. By now you've learned to recognise various personalities among the first-class passengers. The millionaire who always orders the most expensive wine, the British aristocrat who treats stewards with casual condescension. The nouveau riche couple is trying too hard to fit into high society. The genuinely wealthy who wear their money comfortably, without need for display. You also note how the stewards manage this diverse group with remarkable skill. They remember names, preferences and small details that make each passenger feel individually served. A steward might recall that you prefer your coffee very hot, or that you typically skip the soup course, or that you once mentioned enjoying a particular wine. These small acknowledgements of individual preference create the illusion of personal service, even within the industrial scale of Titanic's operations. One evening, Margaret organises an impromptu gathering in the lounge after dinner. Perhaps a dozen passengers attend, forming a loose circle of chairs. Someone suggests telling stories, and suddenly we're entertaining each other with tales from our lives. Margaret describes a disastrous dinner party where everything went wrong, but somehow became the most memorable evening of the season. Thomas tells about discovering a valuable book in a dusty shop where the owner had no idea what he possessed. Edward shares diplomatic anecdotes carefully edited to remove confidential details. When your turn comes, you tell about a business venture that succeeded far beyond expectations, the combination of planning and luck that made everything work perfectly. But as you talk, you realise the story's real point isn't the success. It's the journey, the uncertainty, the gradual realisation that things were going to work out. Your listeners seem to understand this, nodding at recognition of universal experiences dressed in individual circumstances. The gathering continues past midnight, passengers telling stories, laughing, and sharing moments of connection that make Titanic feel less like a ship and more like a floating community. Eventually people drift away to their cabins, but you linger in the lounge thinking about this evening, about these temporary friendships that feel surprisingly substantial. Walking back to your cabin through quiet corridors, you reflect on how ocean travel creates unique social conditions. Remove people from their normal contexts, put them in close proximity for several days, add comfort and leisure, and connections develop that might never form ashore. You'll probably never see most of these people again after the voyage ends. Yet right now, they feel like friends, companions on a shared adventure. In your cabin, you prepare for bed while thinking about tomorrow. The voyage is more than half finished. Titanic is crossing the Atlantic's middle sections now, the deepest waters, furthest from any land. Each day brings you closer to New York, to the end of this experience and to returning to normal life. But tonight, that seems distant and unimportant. Tonight you're here, surrounded by new friends, carried across the ocean in luxury, experiencing something you'll remember forever. The ship takes on a different character after midnight. You discover this one night when sleep eludes you, and you decide to explore rather than lie in bed wrestling with wakefulness. Putting on a robe over your pyjamas and slipping into shoes, you venture out into corridors that have transformed from daytime bustle into something quieter, almost meditative. Night lighting replaces the brilliant illumination of daytime. Softer bulbs cast gentle pools of light separated by stretches of shadow. The effect creates intimacy, making the huge ship feel smaller and more manageable. Your footsteps echo differently in these empty passages, each sound reaching further without daytime noise to absorb it. You climb the grand staircase, meeting no one. The carved oak panels look different in reduced lighting, the wood grain deeper and richer. That clock showing honour and glory crowning time reads 2:15. Somewhere in the ship, crew members maintain their watches, but here in the passenger areas, you have the world to yourself. On the boat deck, cold air hits immediately. You'd expected this, but the reality still takes your breath away. The April night temperature must be barely above freezing, and the wind makes it feel colder. Yet something about the cold appeals to you. It's honest, demanding attention, refusing to be ignored. The sky above Titanic overwhelms with its vastness. You've seen night skies before, but never like this. Never so far from any competing light. Stars pack the darkness in numbers that seem impossible. More stars than sky to hold them. The Milky Way stretches overhead like spilled milk frozen in place. Constellations you've known since childhood appear embedded in this greater pattern, familiar markers in overwhelming abundance. You walk to the railing and look down at the ocean. The water appears black under starlight, invisible except where Titanic's lights reach it. Along the hull, portholes create pools of golden illumination on the surface, giving you glimpses of waves rolling past. Beyond that narrow band of visibility, darkness extends infinitely in all directions. The ship's engines maintain their constant rhythm, felt through your feet as much as heard. Somewhere forward, the watch officers stand on the bridge, monitoring instruments, maintaining course. In the engine rooms far below, crew members tend machinery that drives this enormous vessel forward. But up here, you're alone with the night and the stars and the vast ocean. You think about distance. How far Titanic has travelled from Southampton? How far remains to New York? How deep the water flows beneath the keel? The numbers become abstract at this scale. 3 miles to the ocean floor, hundreds of miles to the nearest land. Thousands of stars visible overhead, measurements that dwarf human comprehension. The cold eventually drives you inside, but you're not ready to return to your cabin. Instead, you explore the ship's public rooms, finding them empty but still lit. The reading room maintains its quiet charm even without readers. The lounge looks almost mysterious in reduced lighting, familiar furniture transformed into unfamiliar shapes and shadows. You discover you're not completely alone after all. In the smoking room, one other passenger occupies a leather chair, staring into the middle distance while nursing a glass of whiskey. He's older, perhaps 70, dressed in a robe similar to yours. He nods acknowledgement when you enter, but doesn't speak, and you respect his desire for solitude by claiming a chair on the opposite side of the room. For perhaps half an hour, you both sit there in comfortable silence. The smoking room's stained glass windows look black from inside, reflecting the room rather than showing anything beyond. The carved ceiling seems to press down slightly without crowds and conversation to push it back. Everything feels compressed, concentrated and essential. Eventually the older gentleman rises, nods again and departs. You remain thinking about nothing in particular, letting your mind drift like the Titanic across the water. Thoughts come and go without demanding attention. Worries that might keep you awake in your cabin feel distant here, manageable and small. Around 3 o'clock, you return to the promenade deck for another exposure to cold and stars. This time you notice the horizon, a line barely visible where starry sky meets dark ocean. The division between up and down, the edge between two infinities. Staring at that line, you feel both very small and somehow connected to something larger, though you couldn't articulate exactly what. A shooting star crosses the sky, there and gone in a breath, then another, then a third. You realise you're watching a meteor shower, pieces of cosmic debris burning up in the atmosphere far above. Each streak of light represents matter older than human civilization, material that's travelled through space for millions of years before ending its journey in a brief flash above the Atlantic. The beauty of it makes your chest tight. You're watching something that has nothing to do with human concerns. the universe simply being itself, indifferent to observers. Yet here you stand, observing, creating meaning from natural phenomena that carry no inherent meaning at all. Back inside again, you wander toward the stern, down staircases you haven't explored before, and through crew areas where signs indicate passengers shouldn't go. Nobody stops you. The night watch apparently assumes any passenger wandering around at this hour has good reason. You emerge onto a lower deck where you can hear the propellers more clearly and feel their vibration more strongly. Looking back along Titanic's length from this position, you see the ship's full scale in a way daytime viewing never quite captures. She rises above you like a cliff face, deck stacked upon deck, lights marking windows and passages. The 4 funnels tower against the stars. The whole structure seems impossible, too large to float and too complex to operate. Yet she moves through the water with grace, carrying hundreds of passengers in comfort while they sleep. You make your way back to familiar areas, climbing toward the boat deck again. The sky has begun showing the first hints of dawn, not light exactly, but a lessening of absolute darkness, a suggestion that day approaches. You're tired now in a pleasant way, the sort of exhaustion that promises deep sleep. One final circuit of the promenade deck serves as the conclusion to your nighttime exploration. The wind still blows cold, but you've adjusted to it, accepted it. The stars still fill the sky, though they seem less overwhelming now, more familiar. The ocean still stretches endlessly, but you've made peace with its vastness. Back in your cabin, finally, you remove your robe and shoes and climb into bed. The sheets feel warm and welcoming after the cold deck. The mattress embraces you. The gentle motion of the ship rocks you like a cradle. You think about the night just past, about stars and darkness and solitude. You think about being awake while others sleep, about seeing the ship in her nighttime aspect, and about discovering that Titanic contains layers of experience beyond daytime luxury. Sleep arrives like a friend you'd been expecting, pulling you down into dreams coloured by starlight and ocean depths, by the rhythm of engines and the whisper of waves along the hull. Tomorrow will bring another day of leisure and luxury, of meals and conversation and social ritual. But tonight belongs to something else, to quiet wonder, to connection with vastness, to moments of pure existence without purpose beyond being. The last thought before sleep claims you completely. You're glad you couldn't sleep earlier, glad you went exploring, and glad you discovered this secret version of Titanic that only reveals herself to the wakeful and the wandering. You wake late after your nighttime adventures, sunlight streaming through your cabin window. Checking your pocket watch, you're startled to find it's nearly 10 o'clock. You've slept through breakfast service, something you haven't done since boarding. But the extra rest feels deserved, and besides, the cafe will still serve lighter fare for late risers. After washing and dressing, you make your way to the cafe, finding it moderately populated with other passengers who've also slept late. You order coffee and toast and settle at a window table to watch the ocean while you eat. The sea looks calmer today, the waves gentler, and the water a deeper blue than you've seen yet on this voyage. Margaret appears with her own coffee and, spotting you, comes over to join. You look rested, she observes, settling into the chair across from yours. You tell her about your nighttime wandering, about stars and solitude and seeing the ship in darkness. She listens with evident interest, then shares her own similar experience from a previous voyage. Apparently many passengers eventually discover the appeal of nighttime exploration, drawn by restlessness or curiosity into seeing their floating home from different perspectives. It's like visiting a familiar house at an unfamiliar hour, Margaret says. Everything looks different. You notice details that daytime activity obscures. The conversation drifts to other topics, her plans once reaching Italy, your own upcoming business in New York, and the strange feeling that this voyage exists outside normal time. We're both aware that Titanic will reach New York in a few days, ending this interlude, returning us to regular life. I always feel slightly melancholy toward the end of ocean voyages, Margaret admits. All these connections we've made, the friendships that feel real despite their brevity. Most of them won't survive contact with shore life. We'll exchange addresses, promise to write, and maybe even mean it sincerely, but then regular life resumes, and this shipboard world fades into a pleasant memory. You recognise the truth in her words. Already you can feel this voyage becoming a story you'll tell, an experience you'll remember rather than something you're actively living. The present moment keeps sliding into past tense, each day adding to accumulated memory. After coffee, you decide to attend the church service being held in the dining saloon. You're not particularly religious, but the service provides an opportunity to see the passenger community gathered for something beyond meals and entertainment. The dining saloon has been transformed, with chairs arranged theatre-style facing a small lectern at the front. Captain Smith conducts the service with the same dignity he brings to ship operations. His voice carries authority but also warmth as he reads from the Book of Common Prayer. The hymns, familiar ones that most people know, rise from hundreds of voices, creating harmony that feels both solemn and uplifting. Looking around at your fellow passengers singing together, you feel connected to something older than Titanic, older than ocean travel, something about humans seeking meaning and community. The sermon, brief and non-controversial, focuses on gratitude and safe passage. Captain Smith thanks God for calm seas and favourable weather, asks for blessings for the remainder of the voyage, and reminds everyone to appreciate the remarkable vessel carrying us across the ocean. It's good pastoral care, appropriate for the setting, demanding nothing while offering comfort. After the service, passengers linger in small groups, conversation flowing naturally. You speak with Thomas about the music, with Edward about maritime traditions, and with several other passengers you've come to know during the voyage. The gathering feels like church fellowship anywhere, people connecting over shared experience, finding comfort in community. Lunch follows its usual pattern of excellence. You've stopped being amazed by the food quality, accepting it as normal rather than exceptional. This adaptation strikes you as interesting. How quickly luxury becomes expected, how standards adjust upward when exposed to consistently high quality. You'll probably find ordinary restaurants disappointing after this voyage. The afternoon brings you to the library, where you've spent minimal time so far. The room contains an impressive book selection: novels, histories, travel narratives, poetry, and reference works. You browse the shelves, pulling volumes at random, reading opening paragraphs and trying to decide what appeals to your current mood. Eventually you select a book about Arctic exploration and settle into a comfortable chair. The contrast appeals to you, reading about extreme cold while sitting in Titanic's perfect comfort, learning about dangerous expeditions while experiencing the safest possible ocean travel. The explorers in the book struggled against hostile nature, risked death regularly, and suffered incredible hardship. You're eating chocolates while reading about their frostbite and starvation. Yet you don't feel guilty about this contrast. Civilization's entire purpose is creating comfort from hostile nature, building systems that protect humans from environmental dangers. Titanic represents the culmination of that project. Nature completely tamed, ocean travel transformed from dangerous necessity into comfortable pleasure. An older woman sits near you also reading. Eventually she looks up and catches your eye. "Good book." You show her the cover and she nods in recognition. "I read that last year. Remarkable stories. Makes you grateful for modern technology, doesn't it?" You agree, and conversation develops naturally. She's a professor's widow, travelling to visit family in America. This is her third Atlantic crossing, and she's watched ships evolve from relatively basic vessels to modern marvels like Titanic. Her observations about maritime progress reveal sharp intelligence and genuine curiosity about technological change. "My late husband believed we were living through humanity's great age of advancement," she tells you. "He thought future generations would look back at our era the way we look back at the Renaissance, a time when human capability exploded, when we achieved things previously thought impossible." "Do you think he was right?" you ask. She considers carefully before answering. Yes, though perhaps not quite the way he imagined. Progress always comes with costs he didn't fully anticipate. But yes, this is a remarkable time to be alive. The conversation continues for perhaps an hour, ranging across topics with the freedom that comes from intelligent strangers meeting by chance. She's read widely, travelled extensively, and thought deeply about the world and humanity's place in it. Talking with her reminds you that education and intelligence aren't limited to any particular age or gender, that wisdom can appear anywhere if you're paying attention. Eventually she returns to her book, and you to yours. But the interaction leaves you feeling enriched, grateful for unexpected connections that ocean travel facilitates. Tea service at 4 o'clock brings you to the cafe again, where the usual crowd has gathered. Your core group sits together, and conversation flows with the ease of established friendship. We've shared enough meals and discussions that inside jokes have developed, references that wouldn't make sense to outsiders but send us into laughter. Sarah describes her aunt's reaction to the Turkish baths. Apparently the older woman found the heat shocking, but the massage afterward deeply satisfying. Thomas reports finishing an excellent novel from the library and offers recommendations for what others should read. Edward shares news from the ship's daily bulletin about events in the wider world. Though these reports feel distant and somewhat unreal from the middle of the Atlantic, you mention your nighttime exploration, and this prompts others to share similar experiences. We discover that several of us have been drawn to late-night wandering, each finding our own version of that peaceful solitude the ship offers after most passengers sleep. We compare favourite spots. Margaret likes the reading room at night, Thomas prefers the smoking room, and Sarah has discovered a quiet corner of the promenade deck. We're like ghosts haunting our own voyage, Edward observes, smiling at the metaphor. Moving through empty spaces while everyone else dreams, dinner that evening feels especially convivial. Your table includes several people you've come to know well, and conversation flows with unusual warmth. Someone proposes a toast to Titanic and Captain Smith, and we all raise our glasses, genuinely grateful for this experience. The meal itself, course after course of exquisite food, hardly registers now. You've become accustomed to culinary excellence, and while you still appreciate the quality, it no longer astonishes. What matters more is the fellowship, the shared experience, and the sense of being part of something special. After dinner, the group migrates to the lounge where the pianist plays and passengers gather for the evening's final social hours. You notice how relationships have developed over the voyage. The young couple you observed early on now seems firmly attached, likely engaged or soon to be. Several passengers who began as strangers now sit together like old friends. The ship's social world has organised itself into a functioning community. Margaret pulls you aside at one point. "I'm going to miss this," she says quietly. "This feeling of being outside regular life, of having time to just be without endless obligations pressing on every moment." You understand exactly what she means. Titanic provides a bubble, a protected space where normal rules don't quite apply. Time moves differently here. Concerns that loom large ashore seem distant. The enforced leisure allows for thought and conversation that regular life rarely permits. We should all do this more often, you suggest. Take deliberate breaks from normal routine and create space for reflection and connection. We should, Margaret agrees. We won't, but we should. The evening winds down slowly. Passengers drift toward their cabins in ones and twos. The pianist plays softer selections, music for ending rather than beginning. Stewards move through the room, collecting empty glasses, straightening furniture, and preparing spaces for tomorrow. You're among the last to leave, reluctant to let this evening end. On the walk back to your cabin, you pause one more time on deck, looking up at stars now familiar from previous nights. The air feels warmer than your first night aboard. Either the temperature has actually risen or you've adapted to the cold. In your cabin, preparing for bed, you reflect on the cultural snapshot this voyage represents. A particular moment in time, April 1912, when technology had advanced far enough to make ocean crossings comfortable, but not so far as to make them routine. When wealthy passengers could experience luxury that previous generations would have considered impossible. When the world felt both larger and smaller than ever before. Larger because global travel was expanding horizons, smaller because technology was connecting distant places. This voyage captures something about early 20th century aspirations. The belief that human ingenuity could solve any problem, the confidence that progress was inevitable and positive, the sense that we were building a better world through engineering and industry. You drift towards sleep thinking about Titanic as a cultural artifact, as a symbol and as a representation of an era and attitudes. She's more than a ship. She's a statement about what humans can achieve, about our ambitions and capabilities and determination to conquer challenges. The engines throb steadily, carrying you through the night toward New York, toward the end of this experience, toward tomorrow and whatever comes after. But tonight, right now, you're here, part of this moment, experiencing something that will live in memory long after the voyage ends. Sleep comes with the gentle rocking of waves against the hull, with the whisper of water rushing past, and with the distant sound of the Titanic's orchestra playing one last waltz before silence claims the night. Imagine yourself standing on a frozen ocean that stretches beyond the horizon in every direction, with the sun on a 4-month vacation. There is no gentle dawn to wake you up, no sunset to signal bedtime, just an endless twilight that leaves you questioning whether you've accidentally broken time itself. Welcome to the polar night, where Arctic explorers from the 1800s and early 1900s learned that surviving winter meant mastering the art of sleeping when your body had absolutely no idea what time it was supposed to be. These weren't your typical camping trips where you could just check your phone for the weather forecast and head home if things got dicey. Once the ice locked their ships in place, they were committed to riding out the darkness like passengers on the world's most uncomfortable cruise ship. The thing about polar night is that it doesn't just mean dark. It means your circadian rhythm, that internal clock that tells you when to feel sleepy, gets tossed around like a snow globe in a blizzard. Imagine trying to maintain a normal sleep schedule when your brain keeps insisting it's either perpetually dawn or perpetually midnight, depending on its mood that day. However, this is where the situation becomes intriguing. These explorers did not simply retreat to a corner and await the arrival of spring. They developed elaborate routines and rituals around sleep that would make a luxury hotel concierge jealous. They had to, because proper rest meant the difference between waking up refreshed and ready to chip ice off the ship's hull or waking up so disoriented you might try to put your boots on your hands. Take the crew of HMS Erebus and Terror during Franklin's expedition, or the men aboard Nansen's Fram. They discovered that creating artificial rhythms was like teaching your body a new dance. Awkward at first, but eventually it would catch on. Ship's bells became their metronome, marking time in a world where natural time had temporarily ceased to exist. The sleeping quarters themselves were marvels of cramped ingenuity. Picture trying to design a bedroom inside a wooden icebox that's constantly creaking and groaning as ice pressure squeezes the hull. Your bedroom might be a space no bigger than a modern walk-in closet, shared with 2 or 3 other explorers who probably hadn't had a proper bath in months. Romance was not in the air, more like a mixture of unwashed wool, seal oil, and that particular mustiness that develops when damp things never quite have the chance to dry out. The beds themselves were often just wooden frames with rope or canvas stretched across them, layered with whatever they could acquire for padding. Some expeditions were lucky enough to have proper mattresses stuffed with horsehair or cotton, but more often than not you were sleeping on a collection of blankets, furs, and whatever extra clothing you weren't currently wearing. It was like playing Tetris with your comfort level. How many layers could you add before you couldn't actually move? Speaking of layers, the clothing situation presented its own unique challenges. You couldn't just strip down to your pyjamas when the temperature inside your shelter hovered around freezing on a good day. Instead, explorers developed a complex system of removing just enough clothing to avoid overheating, while keeping enough on to prevent becoming a popsicle if the heat source failed during the night. The unexpected thing about all this discomfort is that it created a strange kind of camaraderie. When everyone is equally miserable and equally determined to survive, you develop a shared sense of humour about the absurdity of your situation. These men would write in their journals about the particular art of getting comfortable when comfortable was purely a relative term, like being the warmest person in a meat freezer. Now let's discuss the evening routine of an Arctic explorer, because getting ready for bed in the polar night was less like your modern ritual of brushing teeth, and more like preparing for a delicate scientific experiment. First, there was the question of when exactly bedtime occurred. Without the sun's reliable schedule, ship captains had to impose artificial structure, usually maintaining the same watch schedules they'd used during normal sailing. This meant that somewhere around what would have been the evening in the civilized world, you'd hear the call for the evening watch change, and you'd know it was time to begin the elaborate process of transforming yourself from a working explorer into something vaguely resembling a person ready for sleep. The first challenge was heat management. Throughout the day, you'd been active, which generated body heat from your movements. The initial challenge was managing heat. Throughout the day, you'd been active, generating body heat through your movements. Now, you needed to devise a method to maintain warmth while remaining still for 8 hours. This necessitated a strategy that would impress even a chess grandmaster. Utilising too many blankets would result in waking up sweating, which, in sub-zero temperatures, would lead to a chilling experience as that moisture transformed into your personal ice sculpture. The above scenario required a strategy that would make a chess grandmaster proud. Too many blankets and you'd wake up sweating, which in sub-zero temperatures meant you'd then wake up freezing, as that moisture turned into your personal ice sculpture. Insufficient blankets would result in a night spent shivering, akin to a chihuahua caught in a snowstorm. Smart explorers learned to create a layering system that they could adjust throughout the night. They'd start with their base layer of wool undergarments, and yes, they slept in them, because taking them off meant losing precious body heat and then having to warm up freezing fabric against your skin in the morning, which was about as pleasant as it sounds. Over this they'd add a flannel shirt or wool sweater, then their outer layer might be a thick wool coat or fur parka that could be opened or closed depending on how the night was treating them. The really experienced Arctic sleepers learned to position extra clothing within arm's reach, creating a buffet of warmth options they could grab without fully waking up. Then came the delicate art of sharing body heat without driving your bunkmates absolutely insane. In the smaller shelters and ships, you might be sleeping close enough to your companions that you could hear every snore, every toss and turn, and every muttered dream about warm beds back home. Some explorers became legendary for their ability to sleep through anything, a skill that probably saved more friendships than any amount of good intentions. The bedding situation itself was like solving a daily puzzle. Fur sleeping bags, when available, were prized possessions. Reindeer hide was particularly coveted because it provided insulation even when damp, and staying dry was often more of a hope than a reality. But most expeditions had to make do with wool blankets, which worked well until they got wet, at which point they became about as useful for warmth as a wet towel. Some clever explorers figured out that creating a small tent within their larger shelter could trap their body heat more effectively. They'd rig up canvas or extra blankets to create a personal cocoon, like building a fort as a child, except this fort might literally save your life. The mental preparation for sleep was just as important as the physical preparation. You had to train your mind to ignore the constant sounds of the ice, the grinding, cracking and groaning that could sound like the world was slowly tearing itself apart just outside your thin walls. Experienced Arctic explorers learned to consider these sounds almost comforting, like a very strange form of white noise that meant the ice was moving, but not necessarily threatening their immediate survival. Here's something that might surprise you. Eating in the Arctic wasn't just about staying fed, it was about staying sane. When you're trapped in endless darkness with the same handful of people for months on end, mealtime becomes the highlight of your day, your entertainment, your social hour, and occasionally your only reminder that you're still part of the human race. But let's start with the practical side, because Arctic nutrition was like trying to fuel a car with whatever you could find in your garage. These explorers needed massive amounts of calories to keep their bodies generating heat, but they were working with preserved foods that had been packed months or even years earlier, back when someone was optimistically assuming they'd still be edible by the time they were needed. The staples included items such as salt pork, hardtack and pemmican, an incredibly nutritious and appetizing combination of dried meat, fat and berries. Imagine trying to get excited about dinner when your options are leathery meat brick or crackers that require soaking in hot water before they won't break your teeth. But here's where human ingenuity kicks in. These men became surprisingly creative with their limited ingredients. Ship's cooks, who were often just regular crew members with slightly more enthusiasm for not poisoning everyone, learned to stretch their supplies with elaborate stews and soups that could make a small piece of preserved meat feel like a feast when padded out with whatever vegetables they'd managed to keep from freezing solid. The preservation methods themselves were fascinating and slightly terrifying. Before refrigeration, they relied on salt, smoking, and the Arctic's natural freezer temperatures to keep food safe. This meant that opening a barrel of salt pork was like unwrapping a present. I never knew whether I would find perfectly preserved meat or something that had developed its own ecosystem during the journey. Fresh food became the subject of dreams and intricate planning. Some expeditions brought live animals, chickens, pigs, even cows, which provided fresh eggs, milk, or meat for as long as they could be kept alive in the freezing conditions. But keeping livestock alive in the Arctic was like trying to run a farm inside a freezer, and it required constant attention and creativity. Hunting became both a necessity and a psychological lifeline. Fresh seal, walrus, or polar bear meat wasn't just nutrition, it was proof that you could still interact with the world beyond your floating ice prison. The taste of fresh meat after weeks of preserved rations was apparently transformative, akin to discovering colour after living in a world of black and white. The cooking facilities range from ingenious to barely functional. Small expeditions might have just a single oil lamp or alcohol stove that served double duty for cooking and heating. Larger ships were equipped with functional galley stoves, but maintaining their fuel supply required constant balancing between maintaining warmth and ensuring sufficient energy to prepare hot meals. Hot beverages became almost sacred. Tea, coffee and hot chocolate weren't just drinks, they were liquid comfort, warmth you could hold in your hands and feel spreading through your chest. Many explorers wrote about the ritual of their morning hot drink with an almost religious reverence, describing how that first sip could transform their mood and energy for the entire day. Water itself was often an adventure. You couldn't just turn on a tap, you had to melt ice or snow, which sounds simple until you realise that snow can contain all sorts of interesting things. From wind-blown dirt to organic matter you'd rather not think about too hard. Some expeditions set up elaborate systems for collecting and melting clean ice, while others just grabbed whatever was handy and hoped for the best. Mealtime in the Arctic wasn't just about nutrition, it was about maintaining your humanity in a place that seemed designed to strip it away. When you're living in a space smaller than most modern apartments with a group of men who haven't had privacy in months, sharing food becomes a delicate social dance that could make or break the expedition's morale. The dinner hour was often the only time when the entire crew would gather in one place, creating a temporary sense of community that helped combat the isolation and claustrophobia of their situation. Picture trying to have a civilized conversation while balancing a tin plate on your lap, sitting on a wooden crate in a room that's swaying slightly as the ice shifts around your ship, with the temperature just warm enough that your breath doesn't fog but cold enough that your food starts cooling the moment it hits your plate. But these men developed their own etiquette for these strange circumstances. There were unspoken rules about portion sharing, about who got first access to the warmest spot near the stove, and about how to politely ignore it when someone's table manners deteriorated under the stress of extreme conditions. The successful expeditions were often the ones where these social boundaries were respected, even when, especially when, everyone was tired, cold, and probably a little bit crazy. Some ship captains understood the importance of maintaining ceremony even in the wilderness. They'd insist on certain formalities, saying grace, waiting for everyone to be served before starting, attempting to maintain conversation that went beyond the day's work tasks. These small rituals helped preserve the feeling that they were still civilized human beings temporarily visiting the Arctic, rather than slowly transforming into something else entirely. The menu planning was often a source of both creativity and frustration. Cooks had to balance nutrition with morale, which meant sometimes using precious supplies to create special meals for holidays or celebrations. Christmas dinner in the Arctic was an exercise in making magic from mundane ingredients, transforming salt pork and hardtack into something that could at least remind everyone of home, even if it didn't actually taste like it. Trade and bartering became common within the crew. Someone might trade their ration of sugar for extra tobacco, or exchange a portion of their meat allocation for someone else's dried fruit. These small economies helped people feel like they still had some control over their circumstances, some ability to make choices about their daily experience. The conversation during meals ranged from practical discussions about the next day's work to elaborate storytelling sessions where crew members would share tales from their past adventures, their homes, and their plans for when they returned to civilization. These stories served multiple purposes. They were entertainment, they were a way to share knowledge and experience, and they were a method of keeping memories of the outside world alive during the long isolation. Some expeditions developed traditions around food that helped mark the passage of time. Special meals for Sundays, birthday celebrations with whatever small luxuries could be spared, and competitions to see who could create the most interesting dish from standard rations. These traditions created structure and anticipation in a world where every day could otherwise feel exactly the same. The clean-up after meals was its own challenge. Washing dishes when water has to be heated from ice and then disposed of carefully. You can't just dump dirty dishwater anywhere when you're trying to keep your living space sanitary, meant that every pot and plate represented a significant investment of time and fuel. Food storage became a constant concern and occasional source of drama. Supplies had to be carefully rationed and protected from both spoilage and the occasional crew member who might be tempted to help themselves to extra rations during a moment of weakness. The person in charge of the food supplies held one of the most important and sometimes most unpopular positions on the expedition. Let's get back to the sleeping situation, because the relationship between Arctic explorers and their beds was complicated, intimate, and often frustrating, like a romance novel written in a freezer. Your sleeping area wasn't just where you rested, it was your private space, your sanctuary, and sometimes your only escape from the constant company of your fellow explorers. The architecture of Arctic sleeping was an art form born from necessity. In larger expeditions with proper ships, you might have a hammock strung in the crew quarters, swaying gently with the movement of ice pressing against the hull. The rhythm could be soothing, like being rocked to sleep, until the ice decided to shift more dramatically, and suddenly you were experiencing what felt like sleeping in a paint mixer. Smaller expeditions, or those who had to abandon their ships, created sleeping arrangements that would challenge even the most creative interior designer. Snow houses, when properly built, could actually be quite cosy. The snow provided insulation, and body heat could warm the interior to almost comfortable temperatures. But almost comfortable, when you're talking about sleeping in a snow house, still means you're basically camping inside a very elaborate ice cube. The bedtime routine in these conditions required strategic thinking that would impress a military logistics officer. You had to time your preparation just right. Too early, and you'd lie awake in your confined space getting claustrophobic. Too late, and you'd be fumbling with frozen buckles and ties in the dark while your body heat disappeared into the Arctic air. Getting undressed for sleep was like performing a magic trick in reverse. You had to remove layers without losing the warmth those layers had been trapping, then quickly burrow into your sleeping arrangements before your body temperature could drop. Some explorers became remarkably skilled at this process, able to transition from fully dressed to properly bedded down in just a few minutes. The sharing of sleeping spaces created its own etiquette and occasional comedy. When you're pressed close enough to your fellow explorer that you can feel their breathing and hear every shift they make during the night, you develop a heightened awareness of personal habits that you probably never wanted to know about. Some men, like human icebergs, seem to absorb warmth from the air around them, while others, like natural furnaces, generated heat that could warm their neighbours. Snoring became both a blessing and a curse in these tight quarters. On one hand, steady snoring could provide a rhythmic backdrop that helped mask other disturbing sounds from outside. On the other hand, when you were already struggling to sleep in uncomfortable conditions, listening to someone sawing logs 2 feet from your ear could drive you to the edge of sanity. The dreams that came in Arctic sleep were often more vivid and strange than normal dreams, probably due to the combination of stress, unusual sleeping conditions and diet changes. Many explorers wrote about remarkably detailed dreams of home, of warm beds, of foods they missed, of summer days that felt impossibly distant. These dreams could be either a blessing, providing mental escape from their harsh reality, or torture, making the morning awakening even more difficult. Waking up in Arctic conditions required its own set of survival skills. The transition from whatever warmth you'd managed to accumulate during the night to the reality of sub-zero air was like jumping into a cold pool, except the pool was your entire living environment. Some explorers learned to keep essential items within reach, so they could partially dress while still under their covers, extending the warmth as long as possible. The condition of your bedding became crucial to your well-being and morale. Damp blankets or sleeping furs could become frozen solid overnight, creating a choice between sleeping with frozen bedding or taking the time and fuel to thaw and dry everything before sleep. Assuming you had the resources to do so, personal sleeping accessories became precious possessions. A comfortable pillow made from extra clothing or whatever soft materials were available could mean the difference between rest and a night of neck pain. Some explorers fashioned wooden supports or repurposed their boots as makeshift pillows, resulting in inventive solutions that may amuse modern campers, but were crucial for their comfort in those harsh conditions. Living through the polar night meant developing an entirely new relationship with time, consciousness, and what it means to be awake or asleep. When the sun disappears for months, your body's natural rhythms don't just get confused, they stage a full rebellion that would make a toddler's tantrum look like a model of emotional regulation. The psychological effects of endless darkness were something these early explorers had to navigate without any of the scientific understanding we have today about seasonal affective disorder or circadian rhythm disruption. They just knew that after a few weeks of continuous twilight, their minds started playing tricks on them in ways that range from mildly annoying to genuinely concerning. Some men found themselves sleeping at odd hours, wide awake when they should have been worn out, or sleeping for much longer or shorter periods than normal. Others experienced a kind of dreamy wakefulness, where the boundaries between sleeping and waking became blurred, like living in a constant state of just having awakened from a nap but never feeling fully alert. The smart expedition leaders learned to create artificial rhythms to help their crews maintain some semblance of normal sleep patterns. This might mean maintaining strict watch schedules, requiring everyone to be present for meals at specific times, or creating evening activities that helped signal to the brain that bedtime was approaching even when the light outside hadn't changed in weeks. Reading became both a blessing and a challenge during these long nights. Those expeditions lucky enough to have brought books found that reading could help pass the time and provide mental stimulation, but reading by oil lamp or candlelight in cold conditions was demanding on the eyes and required careful management of precious fuel supplies. Some men would save their reading for just before sleep, using it as a mental transition activity, while others found that reading made them more alert when they needed to be winding down. The development of indoor games and activities became crucial for mental health during the long darkness. Card games, storytelling sessions, and music, if anyone had brought instruments, served a dual purpose as both entertainment and markers of the passage of time. Knowing that every evening after dinner there would be a card game or story session helped create the rhythm that the missing sun could no longer provide. Personal hygiene during these extended periods became both more challenging and more important than you might expect. When you're living in close quarters with the same people for months, small issues can become major problems. But washing in sub-zero temperatures with limited water supplies required planning and motivation that could be difficult to maintain when you were already struggling with the psychological effects of isolation and darkness. Some explorers found that maintaining small personal rituals helped them cope with the disorientation of endless night. This might mean keeping a detailed journal, maintaining a specific morning routine regardless of what the light outside looked like, or dedicating time each day to some form of physical exercise within the confined spaces of their shelter. The quality of sleep during polar night often differed from that of normal sleep. Many explorers reported more vivid dreams, more frequent waking during the night, and a general sense that their sleep was less restful, even when they managed to receive adequate hours of rest. This change was probably due to the combination of stress, the unfamiliar environment, and the disruption of normal light-dark cycles that help regulate deep sleep. Temperature regulation during sleep became a complex dance that required constant adjustment. The inside of shelters could vary dramatically in temperature depending on wind conditions, the effectiveness of heating sources, and how well the structure was insulated. Learning to sleep comfortably despite these fluctuations was a skill that separated the successful Arctic sleepers from those who spent their nights tossing and turning. The sounds of the Arctic night created their own soundtrack for sleep. Beyond the ice sounds we mentioned earlier, there were wind patterns, the sounds of other crew members moving around, the occasional animal noise from outside, and the various creaks and settling sounds of their shelter. Learning to identify which sounds were normal and which might indicate a problem became part of the bedtime mental routine. Eventually, every Arctic explorer had to master the art of waking up when morning was purely a theoretical concept. Without the sun's gentle nudging, or even the promise of daylight to motivate getting out of your warm cocoon, starting each day became an act of pure willpower that would challenge even the most disciplined person. The wake-up call in Arctic expeditions was usually artificial, a ship's bell, someone calling out, or simply the gradually increasing activity of other crew members starting their day. But responding to these cues when your body had no natural reason to believe it was morning required developing mental tricks that modern shift workers would recognize and appreciate. Smart explorers learned to prepare for morning the night before, laying out clothes in order, keeping essential items within easy reach, and most importantly, having a plan for the first few minutes after waking that would get them moving before the cold could fully register and convince them to burrow back under their covers for just 5 more minutes that could easily stretch into hours. The first task of the Arctic morning was usually rekindling or tending to heating sources that had been banked overnight. This meant someone had to be brave enough to leave their warm sleeping area and venture into the coldest part of the shelter to coax fires back to life or light oil lamps. This thankless but crucial job often rotated among crew members, or was taken on by early risers who found it easier to get moving once they were already up and active. Breakfast in the Arctic wasn't just the first meal of the day. It was proof that you had successfully survived another night and were ready to face whatever challenges the endless twilight might bring. Hot drinks were especially important in the morning, providing internal warmth that helped motivate the body to continue functioning when external conditions were consistently hostile. Getting dressed in Arctic conditions was like putting on armour for battle against the elements. The process had to be done efficiently to avoid losing body heat, but also carefully to ensure that all layers were properly arranged and that nothing was forgotten. Wet or improperly worn clothing could be dangerous, so the morning dressing routine became a practice sequence that each explorer perfected through experience. Personal grooming in the Arctic morning was often reduced to the absolute basics, but maintaining some standards helped preserve morale and dignity. A quick wash with melted snow water, combing hair, and tending to any minor injuries or frostbite concerns. These small acts of self-care helped maintain the psychological boundary between survival mode and simply giving up on civilization entirely. The transition from the relative shelter of sleeping areas to the full reality of Arctic conditions was always a shock, no matter how many times you'd experienced it. Stepping outside for necessary tasks meant facing air that could literally take your breath away, wind that felt like it was trying to strip the warmth from your body, and a landscape that remained unforgivingly beautiful and hostile. But here's the remarkable thing about these Arctic explorers. They developed not just the skills to survive these conditions, but often a strange appreciation for the unique experience they were living. Many wrote about moments of unexpected beauty, the play of aurora across the sky during clear nights, the intricate patterns of ice formation, and the profound silence that could only be found in places far from civilization. As you settle into your own warm bed tonight, in a room with electric lights and central heating, with the promise of dawn just hours away, you can appreciate both how far we've come and how remarkable those early Arctic explorers truly were. They faced months of darkness and cold with nothing but wool, oil lamps and human determination. They turned survival into an art form and somehow managed to maintain their humanity in conditions that seemed designed to strip it away. Their legacy isn't just the geographical knowledge they gained or the routes they mapped, but the proof that human beings can adapt to almost anything when they have to, and that sometimes the most important survival tool is the ability to find humour and camaraderie even when you're sleeping in what amounts to a very expensive ice cube. So as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed, perhaps you'll spare a thought for those brave souls who spent their nights in the endless Arctic darkness, sharing warmth and stories, and the simple comfort of knowing that morning would come eventually, even if the sun had temporarily forgotten how to rise.